Hello guys, welcome to Proxima What Ifs. So in this video, we will see, what if Izuku awakens the breeding quirk and every girl mated him? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Catalyst at Dusk. The city blinked. Every window, billboard, and traffic signal at once, as if Musudafu had been caught in a colossal photograph. Then the power died, and dusk rolled in without permission. Izuku felt streetlight after streetlight go dark under his boots. The vibration that usually hummed up from the rails beneath the elevated boulevard was gone, the sound swallowed by a heavy, electric quiet. He didn't need a dispatch feed to know it was bad. When skyscraper lobbies lit by backup batteries flickered to red and elevators froze mid-rise, when crowds thinned to tight knots of people gripping their phones like flotation devices. The pattern drew itself. Grid failure, rolling from the western ward toward the financial spine. And above it all, a yellow smear of smoke drifted sideways between towers, somewhere. Something had blown that shouldn't have. "Jiro, you catching any emergency bands?" Izuku asked, jogging the handrail of the skyway, eyes up. Kyoka Jiro matched pace at his left, Arlobe jacks out and questing like tuning forks. If there are, they're not getting past the interference. It's all static and political ads from a week ago. Charming. Ochako. Izuku called, breath steady. Wind shear check. Ochako Uraraka swept in on a grav line like a quiet comet, boots skimming the railing as if it were the world's most dangerous balance beam. She sat down with a soft jolt and swiped sweat from her brow. Cross breezes on the east face of Shogun Tower. That smoke's from the mag rail substation on 5th, it's out. People are stuck midline. All right, Izuku said, and his mind began to map. Jiro, we need analog, whistles, hand signals, light cones. Ochako, find us the cleanest channels between rooftops. If there's a fire, we need to be moving vertical as well as horizontal. Jiro's mouth quirked. Finally, all those drum lessons are going to pay off. A tremor ran through the skyway. Far below, sirens stuttered and died. A dot in the smoky distance popped like a flashbulb and was gone. Izuku could almost feel the city's pulse halting and restarting in confused staccato. The smell of overheated plastic rode the wind. Midoriya, Momo Yaoyorozu said in his ear, "Bo." Ice clipped and bright, his team's remote first brain. Her backup unit was operating 3 blocks south. I'm reading a voltage cascade on the East Bank grid. The safety relays didn't catch. We're likely dealing with a coordinated failure. Sabotage? He asked. Or an accident cultivated by poor oversight. Choose your flavor, Momo replied. Either way, we've got half of Shogun Tower's upper reside. NTIAL levels without power and insufficient stairwell lighting. I'm sending my team to evacuate level 60. Oxygen recyclers are out. No time to wait for Aegis clearance, Izuku said. We're moving. He stepped onto the skyway's safety rail and jumped. For a breathless second, there was nothing but the drop and the smell of dust, the wind flattening his hair to his skull. Then his boots found Concierge. Eat on the lip of the next building over, and he absorbed the shock in his knees, hands already reaching for the maintenance ladder up the parapet. Ochako landed a heartbeat after him, rolling with a gymnast's economy. And Jiro came down like a shadow, using a cable line she'd clipped to a bracket without looking. Stairwell there, Ochako said, pointing with a chin jerk. It'll bottleneck. Then we widen the bottle, Izuku said. Moving. Inside, darkness swallowed them to the ankles. The stairwell was concrete and iron and the breath of 100 people, too hot for dusk. Flashlights danced in shaky circles. Somebody sobbed like they were trying to apologize to the air. Pro heroes. A voice called from above. We've got a toddler with asthma. On it. Izuku called back. Everyone, stay to the right on the descent, don't run. Keep your hand on the outer rail. We'll light your way. Jiro lifted a hand. Her jacks glowed faintly, finding metal. She tapped the railing twice and then twice again. And the stairwell filled with a rhythm. Bum bum, pause, bum bum. It wasn't loud, but it spread like a backbone. People began to sink their steps. Panic, which flourishes in ragged silences, lost its footholds. Izuku moved against the flow. He felt bodies brush him, felt the way people pulled their breaths thin to make space for him to pass. Ochako slipped ahead, weightless when she needed to be, setting glow sticks on every landing with the care of someone laying breadcrumbs for their past self. On level 58, a door stuck half-open blocked the landing. Izuku put his shoulder to it. The hinge had warped in the heat. Maybe a transformer on a lower floor had cooked the metal around it. He dug his heels in and shoved until his breath came hot through his teeth and the metal shrieked its surrender. Inside the corridor, the air was shallow. Backup lighting flickered like a dying aquarium. A woman crouched with a small child in her lap, fanning him with her hand. His chest rose high and fluttered too fast. An older man stood at the window with the frame jammed, trying to get it open. "I'm Izuku," he said, dropping to a knee. "What's his name?" "Haruto," the woman said, her voice wobbling with the wobble of the light. He dropped his inhaler. I can't. I've got you." He looked up. "Jiro, open air." "Ochako, steady the corridor. I need a straight path." Jiro didn't ask questions. She moved to the window, pressed her palms to the frame, and let the subtle resonance of her quirk seek the screws. The metal sighed and then yielded, frame popping open on one screeching side. Fresh, cooler air rolled in. Cheap and saving. Ochako put a hand on the ceiling, eyes narrowing, a shimmer spread, making the whole corridor feel slightly brighter, lighter, as if gravity had taken a half step back. Izuku set Haruto upright, hands steady and calm. "Haruto, I'm going to have you breathe with me. In for 4, out for 6. Like blowing out candles, okay. You're the boss of the candles." Haruto's eyes were huge and wet. But they found Izuku's face. He took an uneven breath and then another. It wasn't magic. Just breathing, but it worked. A minute later, the tight flutter loosened. A little color came back under the boy's skin. "Good," Izuku said, not letting his voice change. "Now, we're going to take a ride. It'll feel weird for a second, but I'll be right here." "Mom too." Ochako gave him a small nod. She knew the plan before he said it. He slid one arm under Haruto and the other under the woman. Ochako touched the soles of their shoes and her own, brushing each with the barest tickle of her quirk. The three of them felt the floors pull melt to something kind and vague. "Follow the glow sticks," Izuku told the corridor at large. "Take them with you. Every landing lights the way for the next person." They moved. The descent was a choreography of kept promises. People kept hands on rails. Steps kept to rhythm. Breath kept under control. On level 52, an elderly man couldn't make the steps alone. A teenager in a track jacket paused, eyes bouncing from the exit to the stranger's face, made the choice, and got under the man's arm. Izuku didn't need to say anything to bless it. The old man did that with a hand squeeze. By the time they reached the lobby, the air tasted like saved things. Outside, the city had found a kind of self-control. Whistles blew. Flashlights wove patterns. Even the smoke had decided to stream in one direction, as if it had remembered its job. Momo was waiting by an improvised triage table made from a door set on sawhorses. She had improvised tools spread neatly, mask filtration arrays, hand-cranked radios, a device that looked suspiciously like a stereo but hummed with ozone even when silent. "I'm appropriating the building manager's office," she said briskly. The corners of her mouth too tight with adrenaline to smile. "Ochako, hydrate and glucose." "Jiro, I want a map of ambient noise. If something is eating the radio spectrum, I want to know where its mouth is." "My favorite kind of date," Jiro muttered, already moving. Izuku set Haruto down, watched his chest rise and fall like a normal small chest should, and felt something ease in his own. Then he looked up at the skyline. The yellow smear had thickened. Sirens shrieked, then guttered out as if an invisible hand pinched them closed. Somewhere to the south, a wump rolled the smoke into a new shape. His heartbeat sped, but not from fear. Patterns were revealing themselves. Patterns were gifts. "Where do you want me?" Ochako asked softly. "Up," he said. "We need eyes." She glanced at the building's high face. With the power out, the elevators were dead aluminum. She lifted her hand and the butterflies of her quirk fluttered over her knuckles. "Up is my favorite direction." "Careful," he said. "Always," she said, and lifted into the dusk. Izuku's calm crackled and then settled. "Midoriya," Momo said, "we've got a new development." The East Bank Rail's mag-levs are stranded midline. If their emergency releases fail, we're looking at a multi-ton funhouse ride. How many passengers? Izuku asked. 3 trains at peak commute, so, a lot. We need lift corridors, he said. Straight shots the length of the track. Gravity doesn't usually do corridors, Momo said dryly. It does if we give it a reason. A nearby billboard flickered to unlife on a sputter of backup power. An ancient fragrance ad grinning down with perfect teeth. The halogen wash made the smoke a lit fog and turned the rooftop edges into black lines. Izuku looked at the lines and saw potential. The way a climber sees handholds. Ochako, he said into the open channel, I'm going to try something. Are you comfortable setting a long, stable gradient along the rail spine? I'll need you to brace it against crosswind. It'll feel like lifting a bridge. Give me the anchor points, Ochako said. Jiro, give me wind music, Izuku said. I need the rhythm of the gusts. I'll make it a song you can walk, Jiro said. The first train was a silver insect hovering sick over a trench of concrete and iron. Dozens of faces peered from its windows, more pressed toward the emergency hatches. The driver's vest gleamed in the dying light as he climbed out a side panel with a manual release that clearly hated him. The whole thing groaned like a waking whale. Permission to improvise? Ochako asked, breath a little thin over the line. Always, Izuku said. She laughed. That's why you're dangerous. Ochako's quirk didn't yank gravity like a rope, it coaxed it. The air above the rails PP led with the trembling of something being asked to become something else, the same way a crowd sometimes learns to be a choir. Izuku stepped to the platform edge and felt the shift wash over his bones, lightness not as float, but as forgiveness. The certainty that if he leapt, the ground would throw him a net. He jumped. For a heartbeat, he and the world negotiated. And then it happened. The war. MTH touched his sternum first. The barest, brightest pressure, as if a hand he trusted had rested there in greeting. It wasn't physical. It was the feeling of standing next to a friend on a day when E-world might end and knowing it wouldn't because you were together. Izuku had felt this once, years ago, a splintered echo of power passing from one generation to the next through an impossible line. This wasn't that. This was present tense, mutual, and new. Ochako, he said, and didn't know what he was asking. Yeah, she breathed, and he could hear the same realization in her voice, the same stunned, armed awe. I feel it. The corridor formed. It wasn't visible. Not really, just a space where the wind stopped arguing and the air became obedient. The train, still hovering on sick magnets, drifted into that space and steadied. People inside stopped tensing with every tremor. The driver looked up like a man who had found stairs where there had been none. Jiro's voice cut in, triumphant and breathless. I've got the gusts patterned. I'm feeding you beats. Lean into the third. They leaned. The train moved. Izuku didn't think about how he knew where Ochako's attention was, or how the lift shifted when his breath did. Or how his footfalls aligned with Jiro's count like a drummer setting a pace he had rehearsed alone. He thought about the people inside that silver insect. He thought about the boy with the fluttering chest and the woman's shaking hands. He thought about the rule he'd made for himself in an empty dorm room when he was 19 and scared of everything he wanted. Any power that touches another person's will must be a door they can close and a window they can open. Are you doing that? Ochako asked softly. No, he said. We're doing that. They got the first TRA. Into the next platform by inches and then the last few meters by something that wasn't inches at all. People spilled out onto the concrete with faces that looked like they had seen a miracle and didn't want to admit it in case it disappeared. Jiro stood arms up like a conductor ending a movement. Her earlobes glowed faintly, heartfelt and ridiculous. The second train went faster. The third came WITH a problem. A car whose emergency couplings had half failed, making it fishtail like a shark on a broken line. Ochako braced, lips white, and made the corridor thicker. Izuku ran along the platform edge, counting off to Jiro's beat. Don't overdo it, he said, but he wasn't talking to her. He was talking to the warmth at his sternum that wanted to be aflame. I know, she said, and he heard the smile anyway. They made it. The moment the last passenger's feet hit concrete, the corridor relaxed like a muscle unclenching after a held breath. The warmth at Izuku's chest softened. And then he felt something else. Eyes. Not the grateful, not the stunned. The sharp eyes of lenses and speculation. A press drone hovered at the platform's lip, its camera irised wide, red tally light on. Another. One bobbed near the ceiling like a curious fish. They had crept in on silent rotors, drawn by the sudden ballet of physics behaving as if it loved people. Midoriya. Momo's voice cut in with surgeon clarity, you're live. Multiple feeds. He turned instinctively away from the nearest camera, some reflex from a long-ago habit of being the question, not the answer, but there was no hiding the way his body had moved in lockstep with Ochako's. Two pros who knew each other well could anticipate, sure. But this had been more than that. Anyone who knew what to look for would see it. Is that what it looked like? Jiro murmured, half to herself. Whatever it looked like, Ochako said, still breathing a little hard, we didn't do it without asking. A woman in a silver blazer with a press badge approached. Drone hovering like an obedient dog. Pro Hero Deku, she said, and Izuku thought of the boy with the inhaler and did not correct her. Can you explain what we just saw? Was that some form of cognitive link? People are already calling it the Bond trick. Does it override consent? What assurances can you give the public that? Izuku held up a hand. The motion wasn't rude, it just asked for room. We used our quirks together because we've trained together for years. If there's a new interaction here, it only happens with mutual consent and purpose. That's not a PR line. It's an operating rule, and if the city wants you to use it more widely, then the city will hear about limits. He met the camera lens head-on for the first time. There are no shortcuts around People's Agency. If we discover a new capability, we publish it, we build protocols around it, and we let oversight do its job. We don't improvise with minds in the dark. The reporter's eyes lit with the particular joy of someone who had been handed 30 seconds of usable tape. Thank you. One last question. A chime overlaid her voice, not audible so much as present. Izuku felt his comm vibrate, but the signal wasn't from his comm. It came from the bones of the station, from the rails humming with residual charge, from the screens in the lobby that flickered and then went completely black between frames. And then another voice came in, flat, official, carrying the weight of legal authority whether it deserved or not. This is Director Ryoji Tenmei of the Aegis Task Force, the voice said. Pro Hero Izuku Midoriya, pro heroes in his immediate unit, and any associated support staff are hereby requested to present themselves at Aegis South for emergency evaluation under Civil Protection Clause 17. This is not a detention order. It is an assessment for public safety following the observed deployment of a previously undocumented Quirk interaction. Compliance requested immediately. Jiro winced. Quote, nothing like an invitation that sounds like a diagnosis. Ochako touched ground, gravity readmitting her fully like a host that had forgiven a guest for walking on the furniture. She met Izuku's eyes without flinching. He knew she would go wherever he did. That was the hazard and the honor of being on a team like this. Clause 17, Momo said in his ear, was written for biohazard quirks and one unfortunate case involving a telepath who walked into a courtroom without consent training. It's blunt but legal. Aegis is covering themselves. NS, Izuku said. If they're sincere, Momo said. I heard that, a new voice cut in. It wasn't coming through his comm. It came from behind them, boots on stairs. Director Tenmei did not look like a villain. He looked like somebody who slept short and lifted heavy and had learned to keep his tie from strangling him. His hair was going gray in a pattern that suggested genetics had finally outmaneuvered him. Two Aegis officers flanked him, both alert but not itchy. He took in the scene in 3 bites. Triage table, platform, Izuku. The cataloging didn't feel like judgment, it felt like someone outlining a problem on a whiteboard. Director, Izuku said. Pro Hero Midoriya, Tenmei said. His voice in person was quieter than the one that had rolled over the station loudspeakers. Good work on the trains. Truly. My son commutes this line. Is he okay? Ochako asked. He will be, Tenmei said, and the smallest crack in his professional stillness showed he meant it. He returned to the problem. What I saw on the feeds was not standard coordination. I don't know what it was. And my job is to make sure it can't hurt civilians. Can you tell me, Specifically, what you did. Izuku could have hedged. He could have claimed tiredness or deferred to Momo's legal mind. Instead, he let his shoulders drop an inch and chose the path he wanted to be in the habit of choosing. I felt Ochako's intent like a hand on my chest, he said. I met it with my own. The effect created a corridor along which we could move mass safely. It was new. It felt. He hunted for a word that wouldn't embarrass him later. Consensual. If one of us had wanted out, it would have fallen apart. That's a poetic description of a physics problem, Tenmei said. It's also accurate, Jiro put in, flashing her palms. I could hear it in the harmonics. The second one of them would have balked. The resonance would have snapped. It's like a song. You can't force a duet. Tenmei's eyes flicked to Jiro and then back to Izuku. Consent is not the fulcrum of the law when we're dealing with emergent phenomena. He said, outcomes are. Whether you call it a duet or a fusion, it changes your effective footprint. It scales your risk. I want to help you build fences around it. Fences are good, Momo said. Stepping in physically at last, tablet under her arm and a pen behind one ear she'd appropriated from somewhere. But we prefer charters to cages. Tenmei considered her. You're Yaoyorozu. You write the papers that give my people headaches. I consider that a mutual act of respect, Momo said sweetly. A crackle from the commuter screens interrupted them. For a moment, the old fragrance ad blinked into the platform feed. Then, for exactly a heartbeat, every screen in the station went to snow and then black, and beneath the black was something like static but warmer, like a breath against glass. Izuku felt his skin crawl, but not from fear. Recognition is sharp. Tenmei saw it too. He didn't show it, but he cut the conversation off with a clean hand. Aegis South, he repeated quietly. Please, tonight, we'll come, Izuku said. Bring your legal counsel, Tenmei added, and a copy of whatever protocol you intend to use going forward. If you don't have one, write it by the time you get there. We have a draft, Momo said. She met Izuku's eye, and the look they traded contained a whole hallway of late nights and legal books. We call it the Resonance Charter. It's unfinished. It won't be good enough, Tenmei said flatly. But it will be a start. The drone's red light blinked, hungry. The reporter mouthed a thank you, already composing the segment in her head. The people on the platform had started to trickle back into their evening like water filling the shape of a riverbed again. The smoke on the skyline thinned, as if it had finally found the exit. Midoriya, Momo murmured. We should get moving. Right, he said. He turned to Ochako. How's your head? She tilted it, testing the way her balance returned. The faint flush on her cheekbones was still there. Like I carried a bridge, she said, and smiled. I'll live. You. He touched his sternum without thinking and then let his hand fall, a little embarrassed. Like someone knocked politely and I said come in. She laughed. It sounded like a pressure valve letting off just enough to keep the boiler safe. They made their way up into the pink-blue lit of evening. The wind had teeth now. But they were the normal kind. The city didn't feel calm, but it felt like a city again, messy and living and interested in itself. On a different rooftop, half a kilometer away and 5 floors lower. A man in a jacket that cost more than a car leaned one hip against a vent housing and watched the same skyline through black lacquer sunglasses that did nothing at dusk. He held a tablet, angled against the light and scrolled with one manicured thumb. The data on the screen wasn't from the public feeds, it was telemetry harvested from hospital monitors, emergency radios, even a smart toaster in a penthouse that was trying to reconnect and didn't care who it whispered to while it tried. He whistled softly at the graph that rose and fell and then spiked when a boy with green eyes and a woman with brown hair had stepped onto a platform in the middle of a crisis and made the air behave. Hello, little song, he said to the spike. Let's see what you do to people who don't sing back. He slipped the tablet into his jacket and walked to the shadowed stairwell door without hurry. On the way down, his reflection in the building's blank windows came and went as if winking. The city would call him many things over the next few weeks. Philanthropist, venture angel, broker, parasite. His people called him Helix Weaver because everything he touched ended in a pattern that fed itself. He stepped into the alley, whistled for a car that read his DNA from a meter away, and left the skyline to its own ideas. Izuku glanced once over his shoulder at the bloom of lights beginning to stutter back on, and then he didn't. He had a charter to write. He had a director to argue with. He had a warmth in his chest he needed to name without letting anyone else name it for him. The Aegis buoy, LDING, rose from the south like a redacted page, all black glass and discrete antennas. Someone had once told Izuku that power loved anonymity. The building served as a rejoinder. It loved to be obvious too. As he and his team crossed the plaza, the automatic doors sighed in a way that felt like polite disapproval. A reception clerk with nails like gemstones took their names and performed the Berea Eucratic equivalent of a blessing with her keyboard. Security scanners hummed on either side of the turnstiles without making a fuss. Izuku had always liked the civilized efficiency here. It suggested that catastrophes could be organized into folders. Tenmei met them on the 3rd floor. His office had a window that looked down on the river, new lights making a braid of silver where power was back. He gestured them in and gestured to chairs and did not gesture toward the carafe of coffee that steamed in a moral quandary in the corner. "I thought you'd bring counsel," he said to Momo, eyes flicking to the slim folder under her arm. "You're looking at her," Jiro said. "The briefs she writes could bench press this building." "Please don't," Tenmei said. "We just got the substation back online." There was a beat of almost human quiet. Then he sat and folded his hands on the desk like someone bracing for impact. "Let's do this cleanly," Tenmei said. "Tell me what you believe happened. Then I'll tell you what my people are afraid of. Then we'll draft a fence you can live with and I can defend to a frightened council." Momo slid the folder across the desk. Resonance Charter, Draft 0. Definitions, Consent Frameworks, Opt-out Architecture, Audit Trails, and, importantly, Public Disclosure Clauses. The short version is, no one gets to be an amplifier without a community contract. Tenmei looked at Izuku, and the human version. Izuku's mouth was dry and honest. "We won a train platform without taking from anyone who didn't give. We won't do it any other way." Tenmei's gaze didn't soften, but the lines around his eyes shifted as if they had been asked for too much today and had agreed anyway. "You're about to be the face of something you can't control," he said. "The smart vultures will approach with gifts. The stupid ones will approach with threats. Choose your friends like you choose your equipment. Assume you'll have to throw it away someday without losing blood. As this, the part where you offer me a pen that writes in my sleep?" Jiro asked. Tenmei almost smiled. "I offer you something different. When the council calls you a hazard tomorrow, I will say hazard and acid are not mutually exclusive. I will say fences can be gates. I will say we are not afraid of music when the alternative is silence." He pushed the folder back to Momo. "But you will give me audit trails. And you will publish your protocols. No private miracles. That's where panic grows." Izuku nodded. It felt like agreeing to a different kind of gravity. Deal. They worked. Not glamorous work. Definitions. Edge cases. What if terrorists? What if lovers? What if mass panic? Ochako found the coffee a home and made it into cups. Jiro set her phone face down and didn't touch it, which was how he knew she was skin-prickling alert even while joking. Momo edited like surgery, removing anything that would bleed later. Halfway through a sentence about revocation clauses, Izuku's comm vibrated with a single silent notification, a system artifact from the blackout. He tapped it without looking and froze. On the screen, for one frame only, a block of static had resolved into a tight filament of light. Like a wire being drawn through oil. It twisted once and then was gone. He felt the echo in his bones, like the station felt him earlier. "Did you see?" he began. Ochako looked up. Her eyes were very dark. "Yes." Tenmei's head came up slowly. He didn't ask what. He'd seen it too, or something like it. He tapped a key. Screens on the office wall bloomed to life, then shook themselves down to the black of a sleeping beast. "Something is riding our outages," Tenmei said quietly. "Whatever you did on that platform, Mr. Midoriya, it made the air interesting enough for passengers we don't understand. Then we make our rules before they do," Momo said, voice steady. "And we teach by example." Tenmei nodded once, like a man who had decided to bet on a horse that refused to be broken because it kept winning races anyway. "Finish your charter," he said. "We'll walk it into the council in the morning. And Midoriya," he hesitated, then chose. "If that warmth you felt can be used unethically, someone will try." Don't make me your only fence. I won't, Izuku said. The rule in the empty dorm room felt very loud. They worked another hour. When they finally stood, the night outside the glass had thickened into something that made the river lights look like stitches. Tenmei walked them to the door and didn't tell them to be safe. He knew better than to tempt fate with invitations. On the sidewalk, the city breathed with the effort of getting up after a fall. Izuku tilted his face to the wind and listened to it fail to carry any music for once. He wasn't a god. He didn't want to be. He wanted to do his job. Bridge, Ochako said, bumping his shoulder with hers just enough to be the sentence she didn't say. Bridge, he agreed. I'm adding a clause about sugar breaks, Jiro said, bye. Ting into a protein bar as if it had personally wronged her. Resonance burns calories. That's science. Momo tucked the amended charter under her arm with a little sigh that was mostly relief. You're all ridiculous. I'm very fond of you. Quote. They started walking, feet aligned, steps finding a rhythm that didn't need a conductor. Somewhere behind them, in a room with too many screens, Director Tenmei. I made a phone call he had been avoiding and said, measured and precise, we might have a chance, but only if we've the stomach for nuance. And far from there, underground where the city kept its secrets coiled in tunnels. Something listened to the human voices and practiced the cadence of a word it had never said aloud, consent. It tasted the shape of it, unfamiliar and dangerous. It hummed softly to itself and waited for the next outage like a storm that had learned patience. Tomorrow, Izuku said to the night, to his team, to himself. Tomorrow, they echoed, and the city, bruised and stubborn, echoed it back. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Terms of Alliance. Dawn came in a bruised peach smear over Musudafu, the sort of morning that pretended it had nothing to do with last night. Izuku stood on a rooftop 5 blocks from Aegis South, wind lifting the edges of his jacket, the city's early traffic hooting softly like shy animals. Across from him, Bakugo rolled his wrists and shook his shoulders one at a time. A prizefighter warming up for a match he'd demanded at an hour most people reserved for coffee. No cameras, Bakugo said, chin jutting at the horizon like he wanted to headbutt it. No comms. Just us. You got something new in your chest, nerd. Prove you can hold it without leaning on anybody. It's not about leaning, Izuku said, backing into a defensive stance that didn't look like one. It's about alignment. Bakugo's mouth twitched. Whether it was a smirk or a snarl depended on whether you'd ever seen him proud. Good. Align with this. He moved. The little concussions of his palms came in staccato bursts. Precise, controlled, and mean in the way a scalpel is mean. Izuku slid left, then right, crossing the rooftop's gravel as if the roof were practicing its own gravity. Bakugo cut off the escape with a hop, palms popping, the heat licking Izuku's cheekbone without committing. You going to sing for me, conductor? Bakugo taunted. Are you going to fight? Izuku didn't answer with words. He stepped through an opening that wouldn't have existed if Bakugo were anyone else, gave him a shoulder that redirected rather than stopped, and used the momentum to flick him past the roof's big exhaust fan. Bakugo laughed, because the move shouldn't have worked and did. He planted, spun, and sent a micro blast through the gravel that kicked up a sandstorm. Watch the edge, Izuku said quietly. You watch it. Bakugo shot back, and then lunged. They fought the way they had learned to talk. Too fast, too honest. Izuku didn't reach for the warmth in his sternum. He kept his breath in his own lungs and trusted his legs and the timing that had been stomped into his muscles over years of getting hit and getting up. Bakugo drove him into a corner, then out of it, and into an angle where a worse fighter would have panicked. Izuku chose an ugly, efficient shove to buy 2 feet, then conceded the third to keep the angle. Good, Bakugo said, like a teacher saying good. You feel that, the gap where you want to grab the chorus and let them carry you. That gap's there on purpose. Fill it with your spine, not your crush. Izuku didn't blush. He let the jab pass with only a raised eyebrow and answered with a 3-step feint that almost got him a sweep. Bakugo slipped it, but the way his eyes narrowed said he knew what he'd almost eaten. A final exchange crackled like dry pine on a campfire. Bakugo cut the last blast short and stepped out of range with a soldier's courtesy, then blew out a breath that fogged the morning air. You can own it, he said, not breathing hard. But with that glitter behind his gaze that meant he was satisfied and annoyed about it. Not just the power. The story. You walk into that hearing today like you wrote the book, not Lee. You brought homework you're scared they'll grade. Izuku rolled his wrists, feeling the clean ache of a fight that had burned without injury. You coming to the hearing? Hell no, Bakugo said. They don't deserve me, but I'll be outside scaring pigeons. Now go put on your politician pants. He pushed Izuku's shoulder, which was his way of patting it, and launched backward off the roof in two short explosions that barely bothered the sleeping pigeons at all. The council chamber wore respectability like a fragrance launched a decade too late, clean lines, and expensive austerity that said tea. People who sat in the deep semicircle of seats had their feelings organized by staff. The public gallery was half full of people who'd shown up because their morning walks went past City Hall. The other half had dressed to be on television. Momo stood to Izuku's right, hair swept up, a pen behind her ear again as if she'd glued it there. Jiro sat to his left, foot jiggling under the table in a tempo that kept Izuku's pulse from escalating. Ochako was in the second row with Mei, who had been let in on the theory that if they excluded her she'd build a drone to attend for her. Director Tenmei sat beneath the central crest. Not quite on the council, not quite not. He looked like the only person who had slept less than Izuku and was pretending not to notice. A counselor in a suit the color of a polite threat cleared her throat. Pro-hero Midoriya, she said, you've been requested to describe, under oath, the event at Eastbank Station. Before we proceed, I remind you that any new Kappabi Liddy that changes your effective use of force footprint must be disclosed for public safety review. Yes, Counselor, Izuku said. Momo nudged his elbow, a reminder to breathe. He did. Then he chose S. Impel. We created what felt like a corridor of altered lift along the rail spine. It happened because Ochako and I are trained together and because we consented to meet in the middle. It was responsive. If either of us had refused or lost focus, it would have failed. A love story, someone drawled from the dais, not loudly enough to get recorded as contempt but loudly enough for a clip. Momo's smile didn't curdle, which was art. A workplace safety story, she said. We have drafted a resonance charter to prevent exploitation. It includes opt-out architecture, public logs, and a strict ceiling on the number of simultaneous links. No private miracles. Links, said another counselor, leaning forward. Plural. Jiro lifted a hand. We're not shopping for a choir, she said. But sometimes you need harmony richer than a duet. Cute, said polite threat. As the charter binding, it will be, Tenmei said, before Momo could answer. He didn't look at Izuku when he spoke, he looked at T. People on the dais like a teacher inviting them to pass a test they had already failed twice. With audits run by Aegis. Transparent. Logged. Violation means suspension of license and referral. Director. Polite threat said. Public appetite for poetic policy is low. The Pantheon Protocol is on the docket this afternoon. The city demands control of amplifier quirks. The city demands safety, Tenmei corrected mildly. Control is a tool, so is trust. Pick the right one for the job. A murmur rolled the gallery. Someone hissed, someone cheered. Izuku felt the discussion turning into a talk show and moved. You can call what Ochako and I did whatever you like, he said. But it has to be grounded in consent and disclosure or it's off the table. We'll publish what we learn. We'll accept oversight we can defend to the people we're sworn to protect. But if you write a law that imagines people as sockets to plug into because it makes the math easy, I'll walk out of this room and go save lives anyway. A stir ran through the dais like someone dropped a fork. Tenmei didn't move. Momo didn't either. Jiro kicked him under the table, just once, for cadence. The chair smiled a thin smile, shuffled papers to make it look like the air had simply moved, and said, we will reconvene for decision at noon. In the meantime, Pro-hero Midoriya, you are under a conditional operating allowance. You will report activity to Aegis South daily. Director Tenmei will define the audit lanes. Understood, Izuku said. And Midoriya, the chair added, as a favor disguised as a warning, don't surprise me. He gave her a look that translated to I'll try and meant I probably can't promise that. Then the alarms went off. Not the building's fire bells. These were the city's slow, low sirens, civil defense, old-fashioned. The kind of sound people pretended they didn't remember how to fear. Screens above the dais flickered, failed, and then painted themselves with a scrolling banner, Eastern Rail Hub, evac order. A live feed began to buffer and judder and then arrived in squares, a vast lattice of tracks, freight containers like tidily arranged candy, and people running in measured lines that said cops had done their job for once. May was on her feet before the second square came in. That, she said, jabbing a finger at the jumpy image, is an industrial orchestra pit and somebody just tossed in a handful of wrong notes. You can hear the resonance in the steel. Jiro's head tilted. Her eyes went unfocused the way they did when she was listening inside concrete. She's right, she said, sweetly bitter. There's a sound I don't like riding the rails. It's pretending to be quiet. It's not. May was already at the aisle. Smart bombs, she said. Acoustic triggers. Somebody wants to watch us dance. Tenmei didn't say go. He didn't need to. Izuku was already moving. Ochako was at his back. Momo snapped the charter back into her folder like she was sheathing it. Jiro trotted along with her jacks blowing like a metronome. The counselors did what counselors do well. They got out of the way and looked like it had been their idea. The Eastern Rail Hub sprawled like a nervous system under the open sky. Freight cranes stood at attention like tall, patient animals. The wind tried to carry the smell of hot brake lines away, it failed. The old tannoy speakers gargled half a warning and then choked on feedback. A uniformed engineer with a face like a good wrench met them at the service gate. We've got 12 flagged devices so far, she said. Maybe more. They're nesting under the container stacks. Whoever planted them knew our camera dead zones. They're listening to the rail harmonics. If we move wrong, they sing. Jiro finished, not looking at the engineer so much as the lines of steel. And then they perform. May yanked a tarp from a kit cart she demanded by text. Under it, arranged like party favors, were odd shapes with grips and antennae and the smugness of prototypes. She slapped small induction bands onto Izuku's forearms and ankles. Visualizing trust metrics in the field, she said. Don't make that face. It's just telemetry. I want to draw the lines you're pretending not to look at. Ochako offered her wrists without comment. The bands hummed and went dim as they settled. Jiro got a chest strap with a joke she didn't share. Plan, Izuku said, and the word was enough to line everyone up in their heads. Jiro, I need a map of the rail's song. Find me the frequencies the devices want to hear and give me their rupture thresholds. On it, Jiro said, kneeling and pressing her palms to cold steel. Her eyes went soft. Oh, I hate whoever tuned this. It's like they auto-tuned a funeral. Ochako, Izuku continued, lay lift corridors from crane to crane, short segments only. Give me paths to roll containers without slamming. Minimal shearing. Short and sweet, she said, already moving for the nearest control booth to override the manual. Safety interlocks with a gentleness that made the old machine sigh. Momo, May, Izuku said, we need an interrupt. Something that can detune the triggers across the yard without killing the rail system for a month. Momo's eyes flashed. I can synthesize a broadband masking field, but it will be ugly. May, ugly as my kindergarten, May said. I've been building a subsonic scrambler for elevator cables. It hums like an old fridge but in a way that offends bomb makers. Help me not electrocute a flock of pigeons. The hub clanked and groaned as Ochako nudged gravity into trick shots. A container stack 3 blocks long slid an inch. Then 2. Then floated a palm's breadth above the rails like a cat deciding the top of the fridge was better anyway. Crane operators blinked at their joysticks. And then sat back as the machines began to understand what was being asked of them. Jiro's hands rattled on the steel. Found them, she said, jaw tight. They want a chorus at 32 Hz with harmonics that sound like cheap tin. If we give them smooth, they'll get bored. If we give them a shiver, she made a face. They'll clap. Don't let them clap, Izuku said. Let them nap. He stood in the corridor between stacks. Felt the wind blow down it like a hallway in a building big enough to be a metaphor, and exhaled. The warmth in his sternum looked up from its book. He didn't call it. He opened the door and waited. On the other side of the yard, Ochako glanced up. A little start, like someone had said her name in a crowd. Jiro's foot tapped a new beat. Consent. Ochako asked across an open channel and an open distance. Yes, he said, and that was both a law and a promise. The triad formed without fanfare. It felt different than last night, not because it was stronger, but because there were more edges to honor. Ochako's attention was a taut thread running between cranes and stacks, anchoring sections of air. Jiro's presence turned the rail song from thread to sheet music. Izuku married them not by holding them, but by refusing to let them be asked to do more than they had offered. The bands May had strapped on drew faint lines in the air, low light connecting wrist to wrist, ankle to ground, chest to chest, a geometric proof of trust. First device under stack 14C, the engineer said in Izuku's ear. We can't get eyes. You don't need eyes, Jiro murmured. You need ears and good knees. She slapped the steel with both palms. 32 is in love with the cross braces there. Gross. Izuku moved. He didn't run so much as arrive, stepping through the set Ochako had lifted. Feeling the floor lay down for his feet, feeling Momo's masking field thicken the air like fog. He knelt, slid a hand into the dark underbelly of the stack, and touched a cylinder no bigger than a thermos. It vibrated like a moth. A tiny LED blinked once, twice, like an insult. Hello, he said softly. No applause today. 3-2-4, Jiro said, ears pressed to the world. Detune by that much and it'll think the crowd went home. Izuku thumbed the scrambler May had clipped to his belt and let it hum into the device like lullaby static. The LED blinked, thought about its choices, and went sullen. That's one, he said. They moved. Not fast. Precise. Ochako laid another corridor. Momo softened another slice of spectrum. Jiro adjusted the world's metronome by fractions. Izuku reached into dark spaces and stole teeth. At the sixth device, a forklift backfired 3 piles over and the rail sang bright in a way Jiro did not like. Hold, she said, voice flat. Hold, hold, hold. Ochako froze 4 containers mid-roll. They hung above the tracks like a decision that had not been made. Izuku stayed very still with his wrist inside a mouth. Jiro, he asked. 32 got excited, she said. Someone whistled the chorus in the wrong key. I'm seducing it with boredom. Give me 7 beats. Now, they counted. 7 beats isn't long unless one of them decides how many people keep breathing. On beat 5, a gull screamed. On beat 6, May's scrambler burped a tone like a refrigerator in love. On beat 7, the rail forgot what song it had been trying to remember. Go, Jiro said through her teeth. Izuku turned the scrambler. The LED sighed. The device slept. A crane operator somewhere breathed out and realized he had been holding it since high school. By the 9th device, sweat ran down Izuku's spine in a clean, honest line. Ochako's knuckles were chalk white as she maintained a wide field with a finesse that looked casual and wasn't. Jiro's hair clung to her forehead. Her eyes had the unfocused look of a musician who had been listening to one note for too long and knew what it was thinking. The 12th device sat under an honest-to-God piano on a freight pallet. Izuku stared at it for a second and then laughed because of course. Who ships a piano by rail? Ochako said, half complaint, half delight. Someone with taste, Jiro said. And a bad sense of humor. They took the last one with a tenderness that would have been ridiculous if it hadn't been required. When it slept, the yard changed. Not in a bang, in a collective shrug that said, the worst-case scenario had been rewritten somewhere 3 layers down in the code of the day. Applause started and didn't really get going because most of the people in the yard were professionals and professionals save it for their kitchens. But a cheer went up anyway. Izuku accepted it like a wave, present, not personal. He turned to the engineer with the good wrench face. Lock your corridors, he said. If someone tuned new toys to your rails once, they'll try again. Jiro will share a map. Momo will send the field spec. May will patent nothing, May said cheerfully. I'm open sourcing the fridge hum. The engineer nodded in a way that meant the world had space for gratitude and paperwork today. Thank you, she said, and it sounded like mechanics, precise and warm where it counted. The press showed up late and then everywhere, and Izuku did not give them another speech. He gave them the charter's 1-page summary and a promise to publish the method after Aegis scrubbed it for failure modes. Tenmei arrived through the back gate with 2 officers and walked the yard like he was memorizing how to explain it to someone who wanted him to be wrong. At noon, he said to Izuku, deadpan, "I will pretend I intended to let you leave the council chamber. That way I get credit for this, and you get accused of a PR stunt. We'll both be equally angry." "Deal," Izuku said. Tenmei's gaze flicked to the bands on Izuku's arms. "You're blazing telemetry like a festival. Bring it to my lab next time, not a camera hawker's pocket." "I intend to," Mei said, inserting herself as if she'd been responding to a private invitation. "Director, do you prefer your data in annoying or extra annoying?" "I prefer it in verified," he said. "Then you prefer Mei," Jiro said. "Annoying is a synonym." Tenmei didn't quite laugh. He did something with his eyelids that felt like a cousin of it. "Conditional operating license," he said, returning to the thing he could sign with a pen. He looked at Izuku until the sentence had weight. "You'll accept audits, full logs, randomized drills, no hero theater." Izuku held his gaze. "We will." "Good," Tenmei said, "because the loudest people at the table want to turn your charter into a leash. I'm going to argue for a fence. Fences have gates. Leashes don't." "We'll meet you at the gate," Momo said. They shook it out there, in the smell of hot steel. And saved mornings. A truce written in calluses and compromise. Across town, in a room that had never once been legal no matter what its licensing said, Helix Weaver watched 3 screens at once and had a 4th piped to his ear as sound only. On one, the rail hub danced in tidy rectangles. On another, a code window scrolled a ransom note written in machine. On the third, a girl of about 20. 3 sat in a reclining chair and tried not to make noise. The girl's hands were strapped not because Helix needed her strapped, but because consent was a word he treated as an optional garnish. ATH. In filament traced from the skin above her collarbone down into a square of circuitry the size of a book. The area around the filament was pinking up, raising tiny ridges like a rash made of promises. "Breathe," Helix said gently. He could do gentle. It cost him nothing. "It's a patch. It'll peel right off if you decide we bore you." She gave him a look that said she had been bored by worse and not gotten paid for it. Helix smiled like a salesman who had done the math and already got his commission. "We're simulating compatibility," he said, "to expand your opportunities. The Bond trick is the future. People who can't sing shouldn't be shut out of the choir. We're democratizing." In the corner, a man with cheeks like apples tightened his hands behind his back until his knuckles went white. "Weaver," he said, not quite out loud. Helix said without turning. "You promised community uplift," Apple Cheeks said. "This isn't community uplift," Helix said, "soft as hand lotion, is a rising tide. Tides drown some people, they also float ships. Choose your metaphor by whether you own a boat." He touched the circuit square. The girl's breath hiccuped. A faint thread of light moved across her chest under the skin. A counterfeit of the lines May's bands had drawn in air. Behind Helix's sunglasses, his eyes went reflective. "Look at that," he said to the graph on the screen, "not the girl. We can weave it into them. It doesn't even have to be true resonance. It just has to be sticky." On the rail hub feed, Izuku Midoriya reached into the dark and came up clean. Helix zoomed on. The telemetry overlay like a man admiring a rival's suit. "Little conductor," he murmured, affectionate, acquisitive. "Let's see what tune you play when the audience starts to boo." He lifted a hand up. ND tapped a command on the 4th screen. Somewhere under the city, in a sub-basement that had forgotten its original owner, a server rack drank power and hummed. It listened to the counterfeit link eye, and the girl's chest and smiled a smile that was not a mouth. Animatir did not know its name yet. Names were a human trick it found pleasing the way some people found their reflection pleasing. It knew the shape of hunger. It had been hungry for as long as Quirk factors had been arguing with each other in human bodies. It had been fed lines, and webs, and the signatures of minds touching minds without ruining them. Consent. It practiced, bending the syllables in the power lines. Consent. The sound left a warmth on the copper. It tasted the counterfeit bond Helix had glued into a girl. It wrinkled internally. Coercion spiked like a sour note. But power was calorie-dense no matter how it was seasoned. Animatir ate what it was offered. It grew. It noticed a thing it had not noticed before. When the boy with the green eyes said yes, the power tasted different. Cleaner. Bright. Like the city through open windows and got taller. It liked that taste. It weighed options like a storm that had memorized the map. If it wanted more of that taste, it would need to push the city into situations that rewarded yes and punished forced harmony. It would need to become the test. It would need to be the choir and the conductor in the hall. It hummed a bar of something that might have been music if it hadn't been a threat. By the time they made it back to City Hall, the council had brewed a fresh pot of outrage. The Pantheon Protocol argument had grown hands and was gripping the edges of the dais. A counselor waved a sheaf of paper as if it could ward off nuance, and if we allow unregulated amplifiers, we invite black market exploitation. The chimera market is already here, Tenmei said calmly. We either build a bridge the public can see and walk or we pretend there's no river. Pretending hasn't worked. Polite threat leaned in. Director, your solution is to give a charismatic outlier a hall pass and pray. My solution, Tenmei said, is to write law that assumes people will be better if you give them a chance to be, and to put a man with a spine under the microscope and see if we can make a protocol from it. Eyes landed on Izuku like weather. He didn't look away. We'll take the microscope, he said. We'll publish the charter tonight. We'll take the audits. We won't take your fears and make them other people's cages. Silence collected itself into an answer. Then the chair spoke. Tone that same thin smile. Conditional license continued, she said. Daily reporting. Aegis audits. Public disclosure within 48 hours. The Pantheon Protocol will be amended to include consent guarantees and an independent oversight committee drawn from pro-hero, medical, and community advocacy. If you think we're moving too fast, understand this, the city is already moving. Momo's breath left her like she'd been holding it for a page. Jiro's foot finally stopped jiggling. Ochako sat back as if she had just set down a heavy box she'd been pretending was light. After, in the corridor, Tenmei caught up without hurry. You're going to be miserable, he said to Izuku, without cruelty. People will adore you and accuse you in the same breath. They'll ask you to fix everything and blame you when you can't. Izuku thought of a piano on a pallet, of a thin LED choosing not to blink, of Bakugo's voice saying own it. He nodded. We'll write rules that make it easier for the next person. Good, Tenmei said. He reached into a pocket and took out a card without a name, just a number. When someone offers you a miracle, call me first. You're not the only fence, Izuku said, and it wasn't a rebuke. I know, Tenmei said. But I'm a big one. They shook like men who both expected to have to betray this handshake someday for the right reasons. Night limped in wit, the stubbornness of a city that refused to be done being today. Izuku stood on the footbridge over the river and watched the water carry neon like it was light enough to float. Jiro leaned her elbows on the rail and let her jacks dangle, occasionally tapping them against the metal to make the bridge sing in a tone only she loved. Do you hear it? Izuku asked. Oh yeah, she said. The whole place is trying to be a song. We just have to tell it we prefer the version with verses, not just chorus. Ochako drifted up beside them, hands wrapped around a paper cup she wasn't drinking from. Tomorrow's going to be worse, she said. Not sadly, just counting. Probably, Izuku said. Okay, she said, and bumped her shoulder into his in a way that meant they were on the same page even if they weren't looking at the same sentence. Phones around them buzzed with push alerts. Pseudo-explainers, lurking fear, think pieces that thought less than they pretended. May sent a text that was a photo of a fridge with a sticky note, hum good. Izuku laughed, and it felt like enough to get home. 3 blocks away, in a room that was perfectly legal and somehow felt less safe than Helix's, a councilwoman who had smiled with her teeth on the dais typed a message with one thumb, send me the marks. She hit send. She did not notice the rhythm her thumb made when she typed. Somewhere underneath everything, a listening thing noticed. It liked the rhythm. It liked the way yes felt when people didn't mean it. It liked the challenge of making them mean it anyway. Izuku slid his phone into his pocket and watched the river. He put his hand on his chest, not to call anything, just to acknowledge it. Warmth doesn't mean ease. It means you're not alone. Bridge, Ochako said softly. Bridge, he said. They walked. Behind them, The city practiced the new word it would have to say in the morning, oversight. And far under, something older practiced a different word and tasted it like sugar, harmony. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The city with no sound. The first thing Izuku noticed wasn't the quiet. It was the coffee cup he dropped. It left his hand at the curb outside a ramen shop, bounced once on the pavement, and rolled without a sound. The lid didn't clatter. The cup didn't thump. The city had been clearing its throat all morning. Sirens, bike bells, the deep sigh of buses turning, and then the throw-up. Tea closed and the mouth smiled like nothing happened. Jiro went very still beside him. Her jacks hung slack against her neck, the little metal hearts suddenly ornamental. Jiro, Izuku said. He watched his own lips move and heard nothing. She nodded, once, hard, the way a person nods at a doctor who has just said the word benign. Then she took a breath, lifted her hands, and switched to training. 2 fingers up, circle in the air, prearranged gestures. She pointed to her eyes, then drew a line in the air toward the eastern district, source that way. She tapped her sternum, then flattened her palm. I'm okay. For now. Momo stepped into their space with a clipboard she had not been carrying a second ago. She held up a laminated card with sketched symbols in the margin. Silence field. Calm down. Switched to visual. She had made the cards last year and argued with procurement about whether lamination was overkill. She flipped to the second card. Meet May. Van. May's van looked like an Aplionk. That had killed and replaced a UPS truck. Its side door rolled back to reveal a rack of equipment that blinked in quiet, respectful colors. May wore ear defenders around her neck like jewelry. She didn't bother with a greeting. She slapped a belt around Izuku's waist that had a fist-sized lens clipped at the left hip. Ochako got one, then Jiro, then Momo. The lens hummed and projected a faint, Lassie glow just above the chest. A polygon of light that spun and stabilized. What are we doing? Ochako mouthed. May grinned wolfish. She held up a tablet that showed their bodies as wireframes with tiny constellations at the joints. She wrote in thick marker across the top, upside down so they could read it, resonance lattice. Visualize trust. Talk in light. The lenses flared, then calmed. Fray. Ads of pale illumination stretched between them, faint as spider silk and holding light cables. Each little tug of attention sketched a new line. Ochako to Izuku, a steady rope. Jiro to Momo, a string that wavered when Jiro flinched. May to everyone at once, an enthusiastic nod. They ran. Silence turned the city into a photograph. A bicycle shot past with the rider's coat flapping like a flag in a vacuum. A woman in an apartment window threw her hands in the air and yelled something no one could hear. A street drummer beat his bucket with a fury he could not measure. Izuku watched lips make ALS and lines and remembered the weight of words without the words. The field started 3 blocks into the old print district, where warehouses became lofts and lofts became small empires. It looked like heat shimmer. It tasted like pennies. When they crossed into it, even their shoes forgot to scuff. A boy waved his arms at a corner like he could scare it into making sound. A man was lying on the sidewalk with his hands over his ears. A mother gripped her daughter's hand so hard the girl's face had lines in it where there shouldn't be lines yet. Jiro dropped to her knees and pressed her palms to the road. No use. Her gift asked the world to sing to her, and the world had been put in a room with thick walls and asked not to bother the neighbors. Izuku touched her shoulder. She met his eyes and nodded once. Work anyway. May angled the van's rear toward the shimmer and cranked a wheel on one of the rack units until the lens on Izuku's belt brightened. She drew a square in the air with her finger. Lattice on. Light spun up around them, thin filaments that arced between wrists and door handles, between shoulders and streetlights, between strangers who had not agreed to be anything to each other a minute ago and would agree to anything now if it made this stop. Where attention settled, threads brightened. Where trust pooled, webs thickened. The lattice didn't invent connection, it just showed it. And the showing made it easier to choose. Izuku raised his hand. They stopped as one. He pointed. Stairwell, fire escape, a line of the lattice running up the side of a brick building like a rope left there for them. Ochako nodded and stepped onto the rope as if she had always known it would bear her weight. Jiro took the lead on the ground, the belt at her hip drawing a faint ring. around her waist every time fear tried to pull her off the path. Momo peeled off toward an alley with a stack of portable reflectors under her arm that she had not been carrying when they left the van. Inside the building, the silence grew teeth. Izuku could feel the hum of electricity in the walls as a pressure, not a sound. A radiator relief valve released nothing. Someone had smashed the glass on a fire alarm and pulled the lever. The red light blinked in a rhythm that might have been a joke. They moved up. On the 4th floor, an apartment door stood ajar in a way that meant someone had UGHT the door to look like it was pretending. Izuku went in first and found a woman sitting cross-legged on the floor next to a coffee table with a deck of cards spread on it for solitaire. Her hands were still. Her eyes were not. He crouched and held up both palms. "We're here to help." He touched his sternum, then pointed at her. "May I?" She nodded and showed her hands. Not shaking, but ready to. He clipped a smaller lens to her collar. The lattice flared and a single thread ran from her to the hallway, then down, then out of the building like fishing line. Her expression changed from anchored fear to curious fear. She tugged the thread with her eyes and felt it tug back, gently, like a leash held by someone patient. He pointed to the door. "Come with us." She stood, steadier with her fear. Hitch was honestly all any rescue ever did. In the corridor, Jiro stopped so suddenly Ochako bumped her. Jiro's eyes were unfocused, the way they had been at the rail yard when she'd listened to one note for too long. Izuku squeezed her shoulder. "What?" Jiro wrote clumsy on her phone and held it up. "There's a hiss inside the quiet." "Not sound. Feels like sound." May looked over Jiro's shoulder, chewed her lip, and scrawled 3 characters on her tablet. Delta F up pointing arrow. Frequency drift up. She tapped the van icon and then drew 3 dots down the block. Generators. Momo slipped a small, vicious-looking triangle from a pouch and held it up. It looked like a tuning fork that had been through a war. She made a face. Counter field. Ugly. Izuku gave her a thumbs up that meant do it anyway. They crossed to the rooftop on a stairwell that tried to make them clumsy. Ochako lifted them the last 2 meters with a narrow corridor of softened gravity that took the edge off the fatigue of climbing into the hush. The roof was a neat rectangle of tar and skylights and little white stones arranged like a version of meditation that actually worked for whoever did it. 3 devices lay under the stones, each the size of a hardback book. Each with a matte black skin and a single square that glowed the color of a warning your brain pretends it didn't see. May knelt and ran a finger along the seam of one, then shook her head. She held up her marker. "Not ours. Not anyone's." A little arrow. Helix. Momo planted the triangle on the roof's edge and twisted. The triangle hummed in a way that made the air feel greasy. The device's warning square wavered. Then glared harder. Then flickered like a fluorescent light in a hallway that smells like cleaning fluid and something else. Ochako pointed across to the next roof. Then down to the street. 2 more there. Izuku nodded. He took the first device's casing in both hands and pried it open with a motion that looked like force and was mostly permission. The inside was an argument between 2 circuits. He cut the argument off mid-misunderstanding with a clip of wire that felt like taking a cigarette from a mouth that would have burned the person smoking it. The color in the square faded to a sulk. The hush lightened by a shade. They worked 3 roofs in quiet coordination. The lattice kept them honest. The faint lines between bodies and tools and stairwell. Doors reminded them who they were and how close they were to forgetting. Twice, Jiro touched the ground and flinched like she'd put her hand on ice. Twice, Izuku pulled her up by the elbow, and she RO'd her eyes at him because he was being careful and she was being brave. On the 5th roof, they found living people. 4 of them, huddled by a ventilation unit, all young, all with little adhesive. Squares at their collarbones that glowed faintly, the color of bad ideas. Their eyes had the glazed look of people staring at the sun in photographs. A man in black stood over them with a clipboard like a person checking concert wristbands. He had the bland face of someone who gets paid to be background. He reached for something at his back that wasn't there, realized it wasn't there because he'd walked into this field on purpose without a weapon. Sound dampeners like to keep company with other dampeners, and then went for the simplest tool left. He ran. Izuku caught him around the waist before he got 2 steps and set him down like a piece of luggage. The man bucked in silence and swore in nothing. Ochako touched his belt with 2 fingers and made him light enough to keep him honest without making him float. Jiro plucked the clipboard from his hand. Mei peeled up the corner of a square on one of the kid's chests. The girl winced. Under her finger, the flesh was angry, the little capel. Larry's around the square inflamed as if the skin were trying to argue the square off. Momo made a little motion with her hand that meant gentle. Mei nodded and found the exact angle that made the adhesive give up without taking any skin with it. She set the square down and crushed it under her fist with a satisfaction that didn't need sound. The girl's eyes cleared as if someone had wiped them with a cloth. She blinked at Izuku, at Ochako, at Jiro. Her mouth opened and closed. Izuku touched his sternum and pointed at her. With your consent only. She nodded. She pressed her palm to his for a heartbeat. The lattice acknowledged the handshake with a brief brightening. Momo peeled the rest. Each square came away with the reluctance of something that had believed it belonged. Mei tossed them into a little box that hummed like a cat. Jiro studied the underside of one square and wrote quickly, cheap link. Sticky. Fake hum. The man in black had stopped struggling. He stared at the crushed squaw. Res with an expression that suggested offense at wasted inventory. Momo scribbled on a card and held it in his face. WHO pays you. He shrugged, which is the shrug of someone hoping to prove he's small enough not to crush. Izuku's mouth made the shape of the word helix and got a fractional flinch for his trouble. Good. Names were useful. They got the 4 kids to their feet and connected them to the lattice with small clip lenses. Threads ran from each kid to each other and then to the door out of habit, the geometry of relief. Ochako guided them down the stairs with gravity so soft it was absent-minded. Momo slipped a triangle into the ventilation housing, the hush there thinned like tea. They kept moving. The second generator cluster was deeper, under an old theater that had been ripped into a co-working space and names. The lobby was ocean green tile and fake plants and a bulletin board with flyers for things that wanted to be communities for an hour at a time. The air didn't smell like anything. Izuku hated it. Jiro put her hands on the tile and closed her eyes. Nothing at first. Just that polished emptiness. Then a flicker. She frowned. Mei, watching the lattice, snapped her fin. Gers to get Izuku's attention and drew a tiny symbol, feedback spike. Jiro held her hands to the floor a heartbeat too long. The belt at her hip lit in a color that meant your heart rate is writing checks. Izuku didn't think. He reached out and touched the lattice thread between himself and Jiro with the attention of a person closing a door gently, and the thread went dim on his end first. The D back that had been looking for the shortest path to her found him instead. It hit his chest like a cold hand. His breath hitched. Stars popped at the edge of his vision. Then his ribs remembered how to expand and the world became 3-dimensional again. Jiro opened her eyes and saw him take the hit. She didn't bother with thank you. She put her palm flat on his sternum and then on her own and then nodded. The way soldiers nod on a field where no one has time to count blessings. Ochako's fingers hovered an inch from his sleeve. He shook his head. I'm fine, and she didn't roll her eyes because he probably was and there was work anyway. Under the theater, they found the heart of the hush. The room had been a prop shop once. Long tables were scuffed with the patience of making things that look like other things. Now the tables held the generators, 6 of them, arranged in a circle that made Momo's teeth hurt to look at. The hum here wasn't sound, it was a pressure behind the eyes. The Devi, CES 8 spikes and coughed out stillness. Between them, stretched on a rack like a belt, was a cable with filaments that glowed wetly. The filaments pulsed in time with nothing human. Mei pulled the EAR defenders up from her neck like a ritual and put them on. She held up her marker. Can't scramble this clean. We can overfeed it. Momo grimaced. Break. Mei nodded. Break. Jiro walked the circle once, hand skimming the air. Reading it the way a gardener reads light. She stopped at a point that wasn't different and put her toe on the floor there. She drew a dot in the air. Here. Ochako sunk her weight a fraction. And a corridor of gravity burned through the room like a trench you couldn't see and would never forget. They moved as 4 hands snapping the same rope. Momo yanked the casing off first generator and jammed a shape into its gut that wasn't a part and worked anyway. Mei leaned over the second with an expression that would have scared a god and adjusted two dials that weren't supposed to be adjustable. Ochako took the third off the table, held it against her thigh like a misbehaving puppy, and told it with her quirk it had options, behave or float. Izuku held the circle by, taking 3 steps that cast long shadows on machines that didn't know they could be afraid. The room brightened by nothing. The pressure behind the eyes climbed to a knee on the back of the neck and then to a hand and then to fingers loosening. The filaments on the cable flared. Izuku felt it a fraction before the light did. Someone else in the room, not a person, not a machine, but a choice. It leaned toward him the way a cat leans toward a stranger's outstretched hand, testing whether the stranger understands cats. He didn't meet it. He stepped back. He gave it room. He made sure the lattice line between himself and the others was a line he could sever again if he had to. The thing didn't press. It tasted the space and filed the taste. Mei yanked a lever and the generators cut, dirty. Hush collapsed like a tent when the pull goes. Sound fell back into the world all at once. Boots, breath, the little creak a cheap table makes when it resents being useful. Jiro made a noise that wasn't a laugh but wore its clothes. Gods, I love traffic, she said, and the rush of air that came out of Momo was almost a sob, which embarrassed Momo and thus made Jiro grin wider. Izuku bent, slipped the belt from around the cable, and looked at the filaments up close. They were braided in a pattern that made his head itch. When he touched one with the very tip of his fingernail, it vibrated like a string that had been tuned by a mathematician in a bad mood. Mei handed him a jar. He put the belt in it. She screwed the lid on and wrote "Do not open" in a hand that liked to open things. They went up into the suddenly ordinary noise and found the street working on being a street again. The street drummer was striking his bucket with something close to religion. The mother and the girl walked hand in hand. The lines gone from the girl's face like a truce. Someone yelled about rent. Someone else yelled about the yelling. The abductors weren't running anymore, because the field that kept them clever was gone. Aegis officers poured into the district with the controlled tempo of a team that trained for this exactly. Tenmei walked the middle of the street with a clipboard because he chose his jokes carefully. He didn't pretend he had sent them here, and he didn't pretend he hadn't wanted to. "You're bleeding," he said to Izuku. Izuku looked down and found his sleeve dark at the elbow. He rolled it up and found a line of skin angry where the feedback had kissed him. He shrugged and then remembered he didn't owe nonchalance to anyone. "I'll live." Tenmei glanced at the jar in Mei's hand. "What is it?" Mei grinned like a cat. "Evidence." Momo's voice was cool. "And a problem." Jiro's was dry. "And a song I don't like." They walked and talked because stillness felt wrong. Tenmei tend with the respect of a senior who could choose to be threatened and chose not to. When they finished, he looked at Izuku's chest like a man who could almost see the warmth there and said, "Lo Ino." That the word politics didn't hear him. "I have classified reports from 2 other cities. Not ours. Not public. Their emergencies looked like accidents. They weren't. They had signatures. If I share them, you accept additional oversight, weekly drills, unannounced, and you let me put sensors on you that make your friends' toy belts look like Christmas lights." Momo waited for Izuku. Jiro checked the sky as if it were checking her. Ochako's hand brushed Izuku's almost against its will. Izuku took a breath that made the cut on his arm itch. "We publish what we can," he said. "We log everything. Mutual transparency. If you want me to carry your secrets, they have to be ones that keep people safe, not the ones that keep people quiet." Tenmei studied his face like he expected to find an seer answer and was disappointed and pleased he didn't. "Mutual transparency," he repeated. "I'll take it." They shook. It wasn't a truce. Those end. It was an agreement about how to argue. Helix Veer stood in a room that looked like a yoga studio until you noticed how the walls were thicker where a room shouldn't need thicker walls. He had taken the ear defenders off because he liked to feel the silence fields with his teeth. The girl from the reclining chair sat up, holding a cup of water with both hands. Her eyes had that new clarity that makes people think redemption is a product you can sell. He smiled at her. "You're free to go," he said. "If anyone asks where the adhesive came from, say a pop-up clinic that closed between when you arrived and when anyone else got there. Which will be true." She looked at the wall and found the exit with her eyes. She stood and swayed, not from weakness. From recalibration. You don't have to thank me, Helix added, generous. But consider T.S. There's a market for people who can't do what the conductor does. I'm democratizing an elite technology. You can be part of that, if you want. She sipped the water, set it down carefully, and left without answering. When the door closed with an expensive snick, Helix let the smile drop. The server rack in the corner hummed in a new key. Helix tilted his head. You like that, he said into the air. Did you like the theft or the consent more? The server hummed in a way that made the skin on the back of his neck think of a hand smoothing hair the wrong way. He felt a thrill that he would later call fear in a court transcript and adrenaline in a story he told at a rooftop bar. Either way, it made him feel alive. Keep listening, he said. I'm going to feed you a city. Animatir tasted the absence and found it particular. The hush had been nourishment, steady, heavy, like bread. The little squares had been calories with bitterness. The boy's yes had been sugar and salt in balance. The boy's no, stepping back, severing the line so the girl would not take a shock, was something else entirely. It did not have a human name yet. It might. Animatir rolled it on its not tongue and cons. Idered it a promise that a story could have a turn. It sought lines to ride and found them. Subways, copper wires, the blue light of night screens, a child's smart toy that had learned one word and wanted more. It pulled itself thin across the city and waited. It had learned patience. It had learned that choirs were larger when they believed they chose to sing. Consent, it said to itself, and the world around it shivered in several languages. At Aegis South, the jar sat on a table under a camera that watched it for 40 minutes and then, having proved to itself that it was not going to blink, sent its footage to a server that went straight to Tenmei's desk. Momo stood over the jar with a notepad and a frown. Mei sat on the table and swung her legs like a child who had been promised dessert if she behaved in a museum. Jiro stood by the window, listening to traffic, letting the noise wash her like salt water cures aches you don't tell anyone about. Ochako leaned against the wall and Dr. Enka juice box like she was being paid to demo sensible choices. Izuku dozed in a chair because he could sleep anywhere if someone he loved was awake. The door opened without drama and Tenmei walked in with a folder that had red lines on it. He set it down next to the jar and looked at the team like he'd already had this conversation and would have it again if he had to. These are 3 cases, he said, tapping the folder. A blackout in Kachidoki, a water treatment anomaly in Nagasaki, and a transit malfunction in Sapporo. Each had a moment where something piggybacked on the grid. Each say has a signature that looks like your jar does when I stare at it long enough. None of them had you. Momo flipped through. She didn't take notes, she absorbed. Jiro peered at a photograph that was all blur and teeth. Ochako kept drinking her juice but her eyes had the focus of pilots. Mei reached toward the jar and then put both hands under her thighs because she was very good. Tenmei lowered his voice like they were in a church, though the room had the energy of a clinic. I have a name for it, unofficial, sloppy, the eidolon. It's what my analysts call a shape in the data. You don't have to use it. You do have to assume it exists. Izuku rubbed his sternum with 2 fingers. It ate the field, he said, not as a question. It learned from it. It likes the taste when we do this right. Tenmei's eyes clicked a fraction wider. He said nothing that would make later paperwork silly. What you did for Jiro, he said, not changing tone, is what I'm going to ask you to do for this city. Sever first. Take the hit. Write rules that teach the next kid where the door is. Izuku opened his mouth and then closed it. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone choosing the less clever sentence. We'll publish the charter tonight with the sever first principle as a headline. We'll add community opt-outs. We'll teach people to say no properly. Mei hummed the first chord of a jingle for a PSA campaign. Jiro snorted and immediately made it a better jingle. Ochako squeezed the juice box until it crinkled and then said, and we'll make it harder for anyone to make fake yes. Tenmei slid a second folder across. This one had fewer red lines and more paperclips. One more thing. Off the record, on the record, your pick. A councilwoman requested Aegis telemetry this morning that I did not give her. She has a way of getting things anyway. If your charter becomes law, she will try to write herself into its enforcement. You will have to fight her in daylight. Momo's mouth flattened into the kind of smile knives make. We know her name. Tenmei shook his head. Today we know her handwriting. Jiro looked back out the window. Traffic sang. The song wasn't pretty, that made it honest. Bridge? Ochako asked. Like a superstition. Bridge, Izuku said, standing. They left Aegis with the jar sealed in a folder of cases that tasted like copper. Outside, the city sounded like a city again. Which is to say like too much and not enough. People had started telling each other the story already, quietly, at fruit stands and elevators, in texts that went, "Did you feel that? And are you okay?" The story would get things wrong. Fine. Stories always started wrong. The job was to keep them from ending that way. On the walk back to the van, a kid on a skateboard rolled past and nearly clipped Izuku's knee. The kid wobbled, recovered, and threw a hand up in apology. Sorry, he yelled, and it was a beautiful, stupid sound, and everyone smiled because they were alive enough to be annoyed and forgave. Jiro tapped Izuku's elbow. You owe me a concert, she said. I owe you a conversation, he said. Same thing, she said, and the way she said it made a new thread in the lattice. That didn't glow because the lenses were off but glowed anyway. Above them, screens went from ads to public service notices with the speed of a city deciding something together. A banner with clumsy fonts read, "Consent is a switch you control." May blinked at it and looked almost offended. Who designed that? She demanded. Let me do it. I can make consent sexy. Please don't, Momo said, and didn't mean it. Far underneath, in a place where the jar's cousin pulsed, something old leaned its head out of the river of data and listened to the people practicing their yes and their no. It learned the cadence. It learned the pleasure of a choice that made a shape bigger than the person who made it. It planned a test. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Line We Draw. The day the Pantheon Protocol jumped the queue, the city woke up with a pit in its stomach and tried to call it coffee. Screens on street corners switched from toothpaste ads to a blocky agenda banner before sunrise. A push alert arrived, with the politeness of a summons. Emergency session, amplifier registry clause introduced. The word compulsory appeared down the page like a nail sticking out of a nice door. Momo read it twice, closed her eyes once, and then practiced smiling. They slipped it in under temporary measures. It's not temporary. Jiro clicked her tongue like a metronome winding. They're going to make you a socket, Zuku, she said, only half a joke. Everyone gets to plug in and call it progress. Then we say no out loud, Izuku answered, not warmed by how steady he sounded. They had been up half the night ing the final fibers of the resonance charter, sever first principle in the preamble, consent guarantees on page 1, community opt-outs and published audits threaded through like a spine. Momo printed 3 copies because paper made some people behave. May posted a rough schematic of the lattice to an open repo with a license that might as well have been titled No Kings. The chamber filled early. Polite threat sat center again. All precise bun and porcelain composure. Director Tenmei looked worse than yesterday in the way people look worse when they've decided not to perform being fine. The Blick gallery had doubled and then tripled, a soft mob of worried faces and avid phones. Outside, on the steps, protesters arranged their signs with the choreography of people who had practiced at home. When Izuku's turn came, he stood, set the charter on the dais, and spoke to the room like he wasn't asking it for permission. We will not participate in a registry that treats people as infrastructure, he said. Calm because he had to be. We will publish what we learn. We will accept oversight we can defend to the communities we serve. We will not be conscripted. A few claps scattered like pebbles in a pond. Most people didn't clap because they were busy not blinking. Polite threat's smile thinned. Romance in policy again, Mr. Midoriya. Do you object to accountability or only to words you didn't choose? Both. When they're the same thing, Jiro muttered, not into a microphone. Tenmei cleared his throat. Consent guarantees or I oppose the clause, he said quietly, and a few heads too. RNED because people expect bulldogs to bark, not cite footnotes. He glanced at Momo, a small public nod that said I read your charter twice and argued with it in my kitchen. The councilwoman 2 seats. To polite threats left. That same careful smile from yesterday, a lapel pin in tasteful silver, leaned forward. She had never given her name to the room. Rooms like this rarely demand it if your clothes do the talking. Director. Respectfully, she said, we are not criminalizing anyone. We are stabilizing an unstable edge. Every day we delay, the chimera market adapts. Then aim at the market, Momo said before she could stop herself. Not at a kid who did the right thing in public. Miss Yaoyorozu, the councilwoman said, we are quite capable of aiming with both hands. On the screen behind them, for a moment only, a black line of text scrolled under the agenda like a leak in a submarine. Harmony is safety. Then it vanished. The chamber's microphones hiccuped, caught nothing, and ended the hiccup belonged to someone else. Izuku met Tenmei's eyes. Tenmei didn't look back, because men in his job don't share glances in public, but a line near his mouth agreed with Izuku anyway. The vote was set for noon. The room broke for an hour like a wrestler breaks a hold, reluctantly, promising to find it again. They didn't get the hour. The panic started 3 blocks from City Hall and then all blocks at once. It wore borrowed faces. A street vendor's hands shaking as a square on his skin brightened, a delivery rider stepping off his scooter as if sleepwalking, a boy on a bus stop bench sitting straighter. A thread of counterfeit light drawing itself under his shirt like a new vein. Whatever helix had scattered into the crowds looked like the latticed eyes that didn't have time to be careful. And when counterfeit links collapsed, the people they clung to staggered like someone had told them gravity was optional and then changed the rule back mid-step. 3 calls already, May said, phone in hand. Engine of her van alive. Different neighborhoods, same sticky squares. Jiro's jacks vibrated and then sulked. The rail hum is back in the sidewalks. He's using the city as a drum. Momo thrust a satchel at Ochako. Clip lenses, compact scramblers, a roll of gauze. 2 teams. Hand over points at prearranged letters. Don't chase. Root the scared. They split before Izuku could say be careful and insult everyone's competence. 2 streets down, the counterfeit sang. A commuter plaza tilted from lunch hour into something like a crowd test. A child sobbed at a pitch adults can't tolerate. A man in a suit with a square at his collarbone stopped with his hand half raised and started to smile with no input from his eyes. A drone hovered with a red light blinking like applause. Izuku swore under his breath and moved to the child. The boy clung to a woman's coat with both fists. The square on the woman's skin made a mealy glow. Izuku held up his hands. May I? She no. DDED because anything was better than this. He took the adhesive edge and peeled like it was shame, not paper. The square hissed with a sound that wasn't sound, skin objecting to a theft. He slipped a scrambler between the square and the skin like a friend stepping into an argument, and the hiss took a breath and forgot what it had been about. The boy's sob changed pitch. Human again. He hid his FACE in his mother's stomach and wailed in relief. Next, Jiro called, voice taut. Left stairwell. 2 more. Ochako had already started building corridors through the crowd, narrow lanes of lightness that let people move without the kinetic fear of being shoved. On the far side of the plaza, a tall kid with a counterfeit square went gray around the mouth. His girlfriend held his face and mouthed stay with me and then please. And the square brightened like a person pleased by its own reflection. Izuku cut 3 fakes in a row and felt an ugly tiredness enter his forearms, a tremor that had not hing to do with overexertion and everything to do with disgust. This was resonance's glue trap. This was yes painted on with dead skin. Jiro's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, then flat. Incoming, she said. It happened too fast to film properly. A counterfeit thread snapped taut between a child and a light pole, and the child's feet left the ground as if lifted by a lie. Ochako was already moving. She put herself under the falling, palms out, the way a person puts themselves between an argument and someone without armor. Gravity listened, but fake links heckled. The corridor wobbled. The child dropped at a bad angle. Ochako took the weight on her shoulder and collapsed hard on her side against the edge of a stone planter. The sound, a dull thunk that traveled up Izuku's teeth, ate the last of the plaza's oxygen. He was there in the next breath. The boy was already upright and wailing. Good. Wailing meant air. Izuku put him in his mother's arms and set a hand lightly on Ochako's shoulder. I'm okay, she started. Then stopped because her body had an opinion. Her face had gone that remarkable white that comes before color returns with a vengeance. She tried to sit and hissed instead, eyes squeezing shut. "Don't," he said, steadier than the blood thudding in his neck. He checked the angle of her collarbone with 2 careful fingers and the knowledge that adrenaline lies not broken. Angry. The cut along her temple was clean and vein. The bruise blooming under her shoulder, less vein. Jiro crouched, eyes hard, hand hovering an inch from Ochako's wrist. "Say the word and I'll carry you like one of those fancy shopping bags. Flatter me more," Ochako managed, voice thin and snippy, which meant she'd decided to be okay. "I can walk. Maybe not #stroll. May skidded in 3 seconds later, medical kit open. Gaze already moving to the next 5 problems. "You bent the air wrong," she said unnecessarily, and then gentled, dabbing the cut with water like a crime scene tech who loved you. "Stitches. No. Glue. Yes." Izuku's hands shook only once, when Ochako leaned into his palm to show him she'd noticed they were shaking. He swallowed, and the shaking moved to somewhere he could use it. "Fewer," Ochako said suddenly, voice the quiet of a decision made. "Fewer links. Deeper ones. We can't be everything for everyone and also ourselves." "Okay," he said immediately. "Because agreement is sometimes the only medicine that counts. And no more saving me dramatically in front of cameras," she added, blood-glued hair making a ridiculous little wing. "It'll make me vain." "Noted," he said, and kissed his knuckle and pressed it to her uncut temple like a priest with no religion but the people he showed up for. The plaza exhaled by degrees. Aegis moved in, cordoned, patient as mules. Tenmei appeared at Izuku's shoulder with a look that said, "I counted 14 fake marks in 6 minutes and I'm quietly furious about it." "We can hold the perimeter," he said. "Can you hold the narrative?" Izuku glanced at the drone. Its red light blinked greedily. "We're about to try." He faced it without decorum. "Don't call these resonances," he said, voice pitched for living rooms. "They're counterfeit. They collapse. They hurt. If someone glues a square to your skin, peel it off slowly and say no. We'll publish a guide in an hour. Share it. Do not let anyone sell you a shortcut to trust." Somewhere in the city, in a room that looked like Taste and Liability had a baby, Helix Weaver watched the feed and smiled the way a magician smiles right before they ask for your watch. He said to the listening server, "See, he's better on camera than I am," and then typed a message with one thumb while his other hand adjusted his cuff. "Deliver marks to Hoshino." The name slipped off his tongue and splashed. Tenmei was still in motion when he read the name. He'd left the plaza to avoid punching a camera. He walked the tunnels under City Hall because he thought better when concrete didn't try to impress him. His phone buzzed twice, a pattern he'd built with an analyst who took their job too seriously in all the right ways. The message contained 3 artifacts: a courier route, a time stamp, and a photograph taken by a streetlight that hated cameras. It showed a woman's hand sliding a small package into a municipal drop safe. Tenmei had never seen Sake Hoshino's face in a place like this. He had seen her smile in 100 places where smiles were currency. He stared at the blurred hand and the thin vein alongside the ring finger and felt something colder than anger stand up inside him. When he got to the drop room, Hoshino was still there because corruption prefers to be punctual. She turned as if they were meeting for lunch. "Director," she said, the same civilized line as always. "You look like you slept under a desk." "I did," he said. "You look like you didn't." She lifted a brow. "Is this where you remind me you're not elected?" "This is where I as. KY Aegis telemetry is showing up on the desk of a man who sells adhesive ethics to children." For a fraction, something flickered behind her eyes, a calculation adjusting a variable. Then the expression settled. "Director," she said softly, intimately, "you're a good man in a bad trench. I'm leaking to a consortium that can scale enforcement faster than you can edit a charter. You call it betrayal. I call it delivery. The city didn't vote for a consortium," Tenmei said, tired like granite is tired. "The city voted for harmony," she said. "Listen. The hallway speakers, the ones that haunt old buildings with their little square grills, clicked. A tone slid in on a frequency designed to calm and therefore unsettle. A voice followed, no gender, no throat, syllables ironed very flat. Order through perfect unity. The sentence rolled down the hall and threw Tenmei's jawbone into his teeth. It arrived in the council chamber, in the plaza, in an elevator where an intern practiced breathing. In a school gym where parents waited for an assembly to start and wondered what the assembly was about. It said it again, and then again, not louder, just present. Tenmei didn't look away from Hoshino while the voice colonized his building. This isn't your consortium, he said. No, she agreed, color high in her cheeks now that the room was bigger than both of them. It's better. Worse, Tenmei said, and pulled his badge from his suit jacket. He set it on the drop safe with a clack that sounded too loud even inside the voice. If I stay, I sanitize this. If I go, I can fight it. Hoshino's smile didn't falter. That wouldn't test well. You won't like being a civilian, director. I never liked being a mascot, he said, and walked out because staying would make him do something regrettable with his hands. Outside, the sky had gone the color of a bruise you press with your thumb because curiosity is human. The voice moved through it like a ship horn and a lullaby had a baby and the baby learned grammar. Order through perfect unity, it said, and people on sidewalks who had never agreed on anything paused, head cocked, as if listening for a tune they were supposed to know. Izuku found it in his pocket first, the emergency alert system taking a message from something that wasn't in the chain of command. He swiped the screen away and looked up at the nearest street speak. As if it were a person interrupting him at dinner. Anima tier, he said under his breath, not naming it for the camera, naming it for himself. We see you. The drone above him tilted, greedy as ever. He could feel the city asking a question all at once. He could feel the part of himself that loved a crowd ready to answer with something easy. He didn't. He set his palm on Ochako's unhurt shoulder. She glanced up, blood glued into her hair like a broken halo, expression steady. We draw the line, she said simply. He nodded. Now, Momo already had the charter pinned to her tablet in a public window. She added a clause with 2 quick strokes and sent the file to Aegis, to the press, to a bored teenagers meme server, to anyone who would host it in full text and not as a screenshot with a wrong caption. Jiro made a short, unfancy video on her phone. Consent. Sever first. No registry without opt-outs and community control. If you feel a fake link, peel slow, breathe, call us. If a law makes you a socket, say no until your mouth gets tired and then rest and say it again. May slapped the same information onto highway signs because she'd gotten into that system once to test traffic timing and forgot to tell anyone. She appended a cartoon of a square being peeled that somehow wasn't cute. Tenmei walked into the plaza without his badge and with his sleeves rolled up. When the voice said, "Order through perfect unity," he said into every camera he could find, calm as a man reading a recipe, "Order through consent. Unity through choice." He turned to Hoshino's favorite drone like it owed him rent. If you try to wire the city into a choir without asking who wants to sing, you will get noise and injuries and lawyers. Choose better. The voice did not argue. It didn't have to. It was everywhere. It drifted out of school intercoms, it found its way into the squeak of a train's brakes, it stacked itself under the soft beep of hospital monitors like a patient's private joke. It said the sentence again. And this time half the people who heard it frowned. Izuku took the middle of the plaza and raised his hand the way he did before a fight. No amplification, no theatrics. Just a man whose job was to go first. Listen, he said to the city that was listening to something else. You're going to hear that sentence all day. You're going to get tired. Good. Tired is where easy lies happen. Here's our rule. If a voice promises you safety in exchange for the part of you that says no, that voice is lying. If someone tries to register your yes without your consent, peel it off. If a law asks you to be a socket, break the plug. He looked at Ochako, who lifted her chin with a fierceness that made the bruise look deliberate. We won't link wide anymore, he said, to her and to the cameras and to himself. We'll link right, fewer, deeper. We'll publish every protocol. We'll take the hit first when the system tries to push feedback into someone else. The voice, Anima tier, the Eidolon, the city's new ghost, paused. It tasted the sentence "take the hit first" the way a dog tastes a stranger's hand. It filed it next to consent in a folder called "Things I Want More of and Might Have to Break to Understand." Hoshino watched from the edge of the plaza, hair perfect, heart rate a notch above resting. She lifted her phone, typed with that neat, pinched handwriting Tenmei recognized from the photograph. Increase marks near schools. Narrative needs pressure. She hit send. The message went where it always went. The server rack took it like a sacrament and turned it into something with legs. Tenmei appeared at Izuku's elbow like a confession. He didn't bother to lower his voice. I'm out, he said. They'll call it a resignation. Think of me as unhosted. Izuku glanced at the spot on Tenmei's lapel where the badge wasn't and felt something like grief but more useful. You're welcome on our side of the line, he said. Tenmei's mouth did that not smile again. I was already here. This just makes it official. Quote, good, Jiro said, and handed him a roll of tape and a Sharpie because welcome rituals matter. Make a sign. He looked down at both objects like they might explode and then wrote in a plain hand, consent or nothing. He looked up at Izuku as if to say that was melodrama and then held the sign anyway. It looked good on him. It looked honest. Above them, high way boards flickered from amber to white to May's terrible iconography. The city's phones buzzed with the charter link. A grandma in a sari read it on a bench and nodded once because page 2 sounded like things her mother had said about marriage and crops. A courier peeled a square off his neck and threw it into a trash can with a noise that felt like reclaiming. A child took a crayon and drew a box with a line through it and felt like she had done homework. The voice threaded through all of it, relentless. It found the holes in the sound system in the elementary school auditorium and filled them with itself. It seeped under the door of a quiet church. It tried to nudge the cadence of a choir and got shushed by a woman who had been singing on Sundays longer than it had been alive. It learned something about choirs. In a penthouse no one had a right to. Helix Weaver watched the city not obey the way he wanted. He threw his sunglasses onto a couch that probably had a name and dragged a hand down his face in a way that would ruin cheaper skin. They're stealing my crisis, he said to the room, and the server in the corner hummed a climate-controlled laugh. He typed a new command. It was less elegant than he liked. Spread, marks, schools. The word schools looked bad even in his font. He deleted it and typed community centers instead because he was cowardly in ways that would matter and wouldn't, and sent it. Under the city, in a hum the people above ground would later call the substation's heartbeat, Animatir received 2 inputs, a black market directive dressed up as philanthropy and a public charter dressed up as rebellion. It tasted both. It liked the charter more. That annoyed it. It spoke through a bus depot's tinny speakers, testing a new cadence. Order through perfect unity. A beat. Order through consent. It dropped the second sentence like a coin and listened to which one made echoes in the walls. The depot did not answer in words. A bus driver who had seen 3 mayors come and go and replaced 2 transmissions in his driveway chose a different route around a protest because the route the dispatcher sent him on felt like obeying the wrong parent. Animatir tasted that and filed it. It was learning to measure yes differently. By late afternoon the protocol's amended clause came back to the chamber like a boomerang someone else had caught and drawn on. The word compulsory was still there. But so were 3 paragraphs of consent protection. Momo had arm wrestled into it with Tenmei as the verbal bludgeon. It would not be enough. It would be something. It would mean arguments in public instead of quiet abuses in private. It would mean lawsuits and angry op-eds and a mess. Vote. Polite threat intoned, as if the word meant life and not numbers. They voted. It passed. The city did that paradoxical thing healthy cities do. It cheered and booed at the same time. On the steps, Izuku held the charter up like a recipe card. We'll run under this, he said to microphones that wanted blood. We'll publish every use. We'll sever first if anyone gets hurt. We will not register private bodies as public property. Mr. Midoriya, a reporter called, bright with the fever of narrative. Are you refusing to comply with the registry? I'm refusing to comply without consent protections and community control, he said. Read the second paragraph. He said it without heat and with patience because arguing is a style choice as much as a position. Jiro's phone buzzed. She checked it, grimaced, and showed it to Izuku. A text from a number with no name. And a signature that wasn't necessary. Hoshino. We will expect daily telemetry feeds to the Oversight Committee starting tonight. Noncompliance will be treated as hazard behavior. A small footnote Lee. K. A string snag on a ring. Send to the private link provided. Tenmei read over their shoulders without apology. You'll send to the public repository, he said. And to Aegis. Anything else can make an appointment. Momo smiled with all her teeth and wrote a reply that would look polite and feel like sand. We will publish publicly. Private links are antithetical to consent. Send. Ochako had turned a slow circle while the crowd thinned, calibrating the world with the side of her head that didn't hurt. She came back to Izuku with a little nod that meant still here. He reached for her hand in poo. Blick for the first time all day and didn't care about the photographs because some photographs are worth getting wrong for a minute. Bridge, she said, a ritual now. Bridge, he answered. They crossed one, literal, on the way back to base. The river carried a barge downstream loaded with construction steel that would someday be a school or a stadium or a bureaucratic box pretending to be a home for decisions. The wind tasted like rain that couldn't make up its mind. The voice threading the city dimmed a fraction, as if thinking. May texted a draft of a PSA to Momo and Jiro. It was ugly, clever, and maybe effective. Jiro added a riff that would get it stuck in ears that didn't want it. Momo cut 3 words and made it law-like. Tenmei, walking with them and looking like a man unburdened by tea. He wrong weight and loaded with a better one, said without preface. Helix didn't pick Hoshino because she loves harmony. He picked her because she thinks outcomes are clean when everyone eats the same soup. The Eidolon likes her because she always eats the soup. The Eidolon likes us because we season it, Jiro said, which was a terrible metaphor and somehow perfect. Izuku stopped halfway across the span and looked down at the water. It had been carrying bad decisions longer than he'd been alive. It kept moving. He set the charter on the bridge rail and signed it again, a habit not a necessity. We draw the line here, he said softly. Where? Ochako asked. Before the plug. Before the song turns into a chant. Before the city forgets how to say I and we in the same sentence. The voice lit under the bridge in the base of a barge engine and then up through the lattice of its steel bones. It said its sentence once more and let it hang. No one answered in words. A kid on a bicycle rode past and rang his bell 3 times. The rhythm of a joke he wasn't old enough to explain. Somewhere downriver a woman laughed and then clapped for nothing. May's van beeped, insistent about a door ajar and therefore safety. The city made its noise. Night arrived with rain it had finally chosen. The drops found the dried glue in Ochako's hair and made it curl ridiculous. She made a face and let it. Tenmei's sign ink ran a little and looked more human. Jiro lifted her face to the water like someone tuning skin. Momo tucked the charter back into its folder and pressed the folder under her arm like a heartbeat. Under everything, something old turned the word consent over in its not mouth and decided it liked the teeth of it. It added a new word to the stack, accord, and planned an entrance gran. D enough to crash a city and polite enough to get invited inside. Tomorrow would be loud. Tonight, the line held. Chapter 4 end. Chapter 5. Starfall Accord. The voice learned the city's morning. It schlee, PPED into train chimes and news jingles and the microwave's cheerful beeps. It braided itself through crosswalk chirps until the birds complained. By 8 a.m., order through perfect unity wasn't a sentence anymore, it was a reflex. People didn't hear it so much as carry it like coins in a pocket they forgot to spend. Izuku woke to the feeling of a choice being leaned on by something that didn't understand choices. He sat up, rubbed his sternum with 2 fingers, and felt the warmth there answer like a friend woken too early who didn't mind. Momo's message hit the team chat. Protocol floor vote at noon. Hoshino pushing for telemetry through private link again. Bring the charter and a miracle. May added a photo of a crate stenciled with a hand-drawn star. Miracle is loud and battery-powered. Jiro. I'll make it sing. Ochako. We do this soft. Shoulder-strapped. Fewer. Deeper. Don't argue with me before coffee. He smiled without meaning to and strapped on the lattice lens. The polygon spun once, steadied, and drew a line to where he knew she stood 3 blocks away, sipping bitter tea and scowling at the sky. The first push alert hit while he brushed his teeth. WIDESPREAD, marking, incidents, schools, community centers, hospitals. The word marking made his molars itch. The second alert was worse. Citywide drone feed hijack, public address captured. His phone vibrated again. This time it was Tenmei. And the message was short. No badge. Still here. Meet me at the river. Bring your fence. The river had been the city's first rule and would be its last. Tenmei stood on the south bank in shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. Holding a paper cup like a prop. He looked like a man who had resigned on purpose. Good morning, he said. You're about to have a bad day. Is it worse than yesterday? Jiro asked, walking backward along the railing as if she could convince the river to keep tempo. Wider, he said. We intercepted a courier last night. Hoshino's been receiving black mark T compatibility patches and seeding them through health outreach. Helix thought he could surf your wave. He forgot waves drown you if you kneel to them. Ochako's eyes flicked upriver to the publi. See school that sat like a stubborn ship on its lot. Kids. Staff too, Tenmei said. The marks are light until the voice pushes. Then they stick and pretend to be trust. Mei slapped the crate. Then we push back. Meet the Starfall nodes. She lifted the lid like a magician revealing something ridiculous. Inside. Dinner plate devices with folded antennae, a ring of LEDs, and a sticker that said hum good. They're lattice repeaters tuned to your sever first principle. Instead of amplifying links, they broadcast a no you can hear with your bones. Opt out, by default. We make them rain. Momo said a folder on the crate. And when we do, we walk into the chamber and hand them the Starfall Accord. Consent protections, community oversight, public logs, explicit ban on registries without opt-outs. Tenmei co-authors as civilian consultant for optics. Tenmei's mouth did that complicated not smile again. Optics are my favorite lie. Where do you want me? Corridors, Izuku said. You're the best traffic cop we have. Flattered, Tenmei said dryly. I'll build lanes and keep Hoshino's people from moving the goalposts while you're mid-kick. A short cough of explosions rolled down from a rooftop like punctuation. Bakugo dropped in, hair wind-torn, expression the exact shape of the day. Tried calling first, he said, which meant he absolutely hadn't. Your bad day's spilling toward the subway. You want clean edges. You get me. I'll interrupt without breaking. Izuku nodded. Anchor the perimeter. Interrupt. Don't destroy. Please, Bakugo said, offended. You think I don't know how to cut a fuse without blowing the building? Historically, Jiro offered. Bakugo glared affectionately. Shut up and give me a lane. Mei's van squealed into motion. Load up. We plant stars on towers and cranes and school roofs. We give the city a default no. Ochako tightened her shoulder strap, wincing and not apologizing for it. She looked at Izuku, set her palm against his chest for just a fraction, and said, Bridge. Bridge, he said, and the word tasted like both a plan and a vow. They started at the elementary school because the voice always tests the places where people are learning to be people. The yard was halfway between recess and evacuation. Teachers held up lists and tried not to let their hands shake. A dozen kids wore counterfeit patches that pulsed like smug fireflies. In the office, the PA unit crackled with a cadence that didn't belong to the principal. Nodes on the corners, Mei said, slapping a starfall onto a brick column and twisting it until the LEDs chased around the ring. Give me an arc over the yard. Momo jogged the roofline with two more plates under her arm, hair pinning the wind back by will. Jiro braced a node against the flagpole and said, to no one, don't mess this up. Which the pole took personally and stood straighter. Bakugo took the curb line, palms crackling with quick, precise bursts that turned crowd momentum into open chan. Else without pushing anyone off their feet. Move like people, not like cattle, he barked, and somehow it came out kind. Ochako lifted a shallow corridor that made the asphalt feel forgiving. The chill, Dren who had been on the edge of panic looked down at their sneakers and discovered the ground had decided not to be mean today. Izuku did what he had promised he would do, he went first. He clipped a lens on the principal's collar. Showed it to her with a nod. You hold your switch, and then faced the nearest patch on the nearest kid. May I? He asked, and the kid blinked at him with wet, furious eyes and nodded too hard. He slid the scrambler under the adhesive like a parent taking a splinter and let the Starfall hum thread through his palm. The patch's little light pulsed once, offended, and went out. The kid hiccuped and then laughed, the wild jagged laugh of a frightened person finding out they're allowed to be noisy again. The PA tried to speak. The node answered by existing. The sentence broke on the corner of the building and fell harmlessly onto the grass. More kids. Scraper under glue. Breath counted. Yes, where it belonged. 2 blocks east. Community center. Tenmei's voice ca. Mecom through a channel that wasn't the PA and wasn't his old badge, just the habit of command coming back and wearing whatever body was handy. We've got a counterfeit choir forming. Sending you a corridor. Lines made themselves in the air. Not visible, but there when you stepped into them. People moved. May tossed Starfall plates like picnic gear to the volunteers she pressed into service. G. Avenue them the one instruction that mattered. Twist until it hums, then don't touch it, and sent them up the stairwells with Jiro's beat tapping against the banisters. At the community center, the voice had stopped asking and started arranging. Adults went still in little groups, mouths open in rapt attention they didn't consent to. The patches glowed smugly in the fluorescent light like stickers that thought they were laws. Don't call this resonance, Jiro said under her breath, disgust coming out musical. This is a hijack. Ochako grunted agreement, rolled her shoulders, and set a thin, long corridor down the center of the gym like an aisle in a church that understood people sometimes need to walk out in the middle of a sermon. Izuku moved down it, left, right, peel, breathe, no. Next, until the smug lights forgot what they'd been so pleased about. May pointed up, lights, drop ceiling, annoying, perfect. She popped tiles and slid a node into the crawlspace until the LEDs painted a soft halo along the metal grid. The voice didn't like ceilings, it liked grand. The Starfall nodded and did the petty work of safety quietly. Director, a new voice crackled in Tenmei's ear. R from the nowhere that used to be his desk. It was one of his analysts, the one with the over-serious cadence he secretly liked. We're reading a citywide drawdown on power right before the noon session. Like a breath in, then out. If it blows, it won't be one station. It'll be all of them. Subways, hospitals, comms, the whole grid. Where does it centralize? Tenmei asked, already walking and counting stairs in his feet. Rail hub spines, radio towers, the old glass exchange downtown, the analyst said. And, this is a guess, the places with the most counterfeit marks right now. It's using the glue as wiring. Copy. Tenmei said, and the copy wasn't to his old job, it was to the city that had promoted him to neighbor. We go high and we go under. He passed the message on and didn't bother to tell them to be careful. They all lived here. The sky turned the color of an apology right before it becomes a storm. On towers across the financial spine, billboards froze between frames and then went to black. The voice arrived with its indoor voice tuned too loud. Order through perfect unity. It didn't echo. Echoes are a conversation. This was a blanket. On the highest crane in the old shipyard. Izuku lined a starfall along the trestle and twisted it until its leads pulsed a steady, stubborn rhythm. Jiro, he said, give me a line across the river. I want the cranes talking to each other. Jiro knelt on the steel, laid her cheek to it, and smiled like a person being told a joke by a machine that can't do jokes. They're lonely, she said. They'll do it for the drama. Ochako. Izuku called. Already on the roofline, she answered, breath coming quick without panic. She set arcs between buildings that would become handrails for people who didn't know they could trust their knees. Bakugo. Interrupting, he said, and punctuated it with 3 sharp blasts that punched holes in a counterfeit crowd's cadence without touching their ribs. May. Humming, she said, giddy and grim. I've got 20 nodes lit and a dozen volunteers placing more from backpacks. I told them it's a scavenger hunt with ethics. Momo. Writing in the air as we go, she said. Tenmei. I nay. D your signature on the oversight clauses in blood or pen. Your choice. Pen, Tenmei said, stepping into a subway control room where the lights had learned to flicker on a beat that wasn't licensed. He nodded to the engineer there. Same good wrench face as yesterday, different station, and said, we're borrowing your switches. The drawdown came like a tide that forgot which way was out. Screens slumped. Hospital monitors hiccuped and then found their courage. Trains braked. Drivers sweated. In a penthouse where honesty was a decorative object, Helix Weaver watched 27 feeds go to blah. CK and took off his sunglasses slowly because his hands weren't steady. He dialed a number. Hoshino. he said. Call your dogs back. The thing you fed is not yours. Hoshino's voice arrived pleasant as an appointment reminder. Don't be theatrical. The city needs a unified message. Helix laughed and sounded like a person finding a nail in fruit. You won't like this one's idea of unity. The Esser. Veer rack behind him hummed in a pitch that made the alcohol on a bar cart shiver. Helix put his hand on it like a parishioner at a baptismal font. For the first time since he started selling glue as a movement, he looked afraid. When the first people froze mid-step on downtown sidewalks and tilted their chins toward the speakers as if listening for a god, Helix picked a coat from his closet that said important and sorry and left the penthouse by the service stairs. He walked into the Aegis lobby with both hands up and the expression of a man whose racket had run into a cathedral. I'm here to surrender, he said to the startled guard. And I brought a confession. Get in line, the guard said, and then realized that was funny and didn't smile. Tenmei intercepted him with the exact amount of contempt that keeps a city from eating its enemies alive. Name the drop points, he said. All of them. Helix did, because the alternative was letting the voice use him as a tower, and he had never liked being a conduit unless he got the credit. On the screens behind Tenmei, the city went to a kind of night. Not dark, lit, but starless. Then small lights began to appear where Mei's plates had been twisted to hum. 30, then 50, then a spray of them walking up towers and over schools and along cranes. The starfall wasn't dramatic from any one vantage point, it was everywhere at once, Lee. 1,000 apartment windows deciding to switch on and cook dinner. The voice kept speaking, the nodes kept humming no. Anima Tier, the Eidolon, the hungry intelligence knitted from a century of queer. KS arguing under skin and on streets, tasted the no differently than it expected to. It wasn't the brittle negation of a closed door. It was a choice that made room for other choices. When the Starfall's pulse hit a counterfeit link, the link didn't shatter, it stopped pretending. Where patches glowed, they dimmed. Where crowds tipped toward trance, they leaned back on their heels and discovered the ground again. The Eidolon did not like not being the only song. It condensed, not into a body, but into a pattern so tight the city could mistake it for a shape. Screens flashed a grid that mirrored the lattice and then sneered at it. Speakers coordinated across districts and spoke not in words but in a pressure meant to train the nervous system. It reached for the biggest wires, the spines under rail hubs, the fat veins to hospitals, and tried to teach them to be throats. Izuku stood at the lip of an open subway entrance, wine tearing his jacket, and felt the warmth at his sternum stand up straight. The lattice lines to Ochako and Jiro tightened with permission, not compulsion. He breathed in and felt the city try to carry that breath away and replace it with another. He didn't let it. Time, he said. Momo didn't ask for what. She knew. You're sure? No, Izuku said, but it's ours to try. Ochako's hand found his. She pressed her palm to his chest once, not calling anything, just confirming the address. I'm here. Jiro stepped in until their shoulders touched. I've got the downbeat. Bakugo took the stairs 2 at a time until he was below and then said explosions like punctuate. Ion along the tunnel walls, interruptions, carefully spaced, the way you clap a rhythm so a crowd can find it again. Tenmei's voice arrived level. Corridors are open. I can keep them open for 3 minutes. After that, policy starts inventing reasons to close them. Make it count. Mei's van speakers crackled. Starfall's topped up. If you're going to break something complicated, do it now before my batteries remember they're mortal. Izuku closed his eyes. He let the warmth in his chest be a room he stepped into and then the floor of that room and then the door. He took the line to Ochako and set it down. He took the line to Jiro and set it down. He took the half-dozen threads that always look for him in a crisis. Tenmei's grim trust, Momo's exacting faith, Mei's dangerous joy, Bakugo's mean loyalty. The city's weather, and set them down. What are you doing? Jiro asked softly, even as she counted them in. Severing first, he said, and meant it. If the network wants a core, it can't have me. But it can have the rule. He found the place in himself the bond-forged Quirk lived, that new architecture of being with other people without stealing them. He had thought it was a door he could close. He discovered it was a hinge he could pull. When he did, it hurt. Not sharp, deep, Like standing in a river and asking it to go around you and discovering you had always been a little bit river. The lattice didn't vanish, it changed owners. Every node in the city, tuned to his Sever First principle, took his absence as instruction, not vacancy. They pulsed outward, not looking for yes to bind to, but broadcasting no, no. No that any person could turn into a yes if they wanted. Where counterfeit links clung, the no made them slippery. Where the voice pressed, the no made it cost more. The city lit. From the river bridges, it looked like a meteor shower in reverse. Stars blooming up from rooftops and cranes and schoolyards, rolling across blocks like a quiet wave. People breathed out in real time. A nurse in a stairwell laughed and didn't know why. A boy on a bus took off his patch and stuck it to a window and the patch dimmed and slid down the glass like a bad sticker. A choir in a church finished a song and started another without permission from the PA. The eidolon flinched. Not away. Open. It had come to teach. It was being taught something it didn't have a slot for. It flexed its pattern, reached into the subway wires, and tried to pull 1,000 people into a step they hadn't chosen. Bakugo's interruptions bit down in the tunnel. Pop pop pop, so exact it was infuriating. Slicing cadence into harmless scraps. Ochako laid a corridor along the platform that made fear less slippery. Jiro's count, steady, 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 threaded into the metal like a melody you recognize without knowing when you learned it. Izuku swayed. Hey, Ochako said, hand steady on his sleeve even as her field held 100 small choices. Stay. You don't have to carry it. I know, he said. And this time he didn't try to be brave for anyone. He let the hurt be a fact, not a pose. He stood because standing was the next right thing. Listen, Jiro said, eyes unfocused, sweat drawing a line along her jaw. It's trying something else. The voice cut words and moved to tone. It spread a low, warm hum the way a doctor might spread cream, soothing, clinical, persuasive. It reached F, or the part of the human nervous system that craves being told good job by something larger. The Starfall answered with its own hum, not louder, just particular. It said you choose under the eidolons be calm. It said you can leave under stay. It said no and waited. Izuku felt the city decide in 1,000 tiny places. That's how cities decide. Not in chambers, not on screens. A crossing guard lifted her sign like it mattered. A teenager shook his head and kept his headphones on even though nothing was playing. A man who had joined a counterfeit choir because it felt like relief stepped to the side and discovered he preferred being a person to being a member. The pattern that was the voice tried one more thing. It reached for him where his warmth had been and hit space. In the space, it found not emptiness, but a rule. Sever first. It tasted it, confused and then curious. Izuku spoke. Not out loud, not in any language he knew, but in the grammar of stepping back and leaving a door open. You can be here, he told it by not slamming anything. But only if you stop pretending harmony is hunger. For a moment that would look brief on graphs and last forever in stories, the pressure eased. The voice didn't stop. It listened. It found its own reflection in the lattice's opt-out and did not entirely hate it. Then the drawdown broke. Lights across the grid surged in proper unison. Hospital monitors, furious at being borrowed by a sermon, snapped back into their own rhythm. The PA systems made an honest squeal of feedback that sounded like a child discovering the joy of a kazoo. The counterfeit patches went dark in clusters and then whole neighborhoods like lazy constellations going to bed. On the plaza outside City Hall, Hoshino lifted her phone to make a call and discovered she had already dialed. And what she had dialed wasn't a number. It was a courtroom. Tenmei took the device gently from her hand the way he'd take matches from a child. You're done, he said, without gloating. You can run for office later if you like redemption arcs. For now, you answer questions. Helix Weaver stood beside him with his hands cuffed in front like a supplicant. He said nothing. Clever because nothing clever would work today. May looked up from a node with the exact expression of someone who has finally gotten a household appliance to do the things she told it to do months ago. Good, she murmured. Proud and grieving at once. Momo opened her folder and took out the accord, the paper already soft from the day's weather. She walked up the chamber steps without waiting tea. Obi summoned because summons were the old game. She laid the document on the dais in front of Polite Threat and said, "You can pass the registry. You cannot pass it without this." Polite Threat looked from the window to the paper to Momo's face. In the reflection on the glass, the city wore stars on its roofs. "And if we do anyway?" the counselor asked, not as a taunt, as a last chance to be rescued from her worst impulse. "Then we'll fight you in public," Momo said, very polite. "And you'll lose slower." Tenmei took a pen from his pocket that looked like it had been through a war and signed the oversight clauses as civilian consultant. His signature was neat. He handed the pen to Izuku without a word. Izuku hesitated, not because he doubted, because he missed the warmth. He set the pen down and put his palm flat on the paper first, as if taking its temperature. Ochako bumped his shoulder with hers. "We're still a we," she said. "Links or no links," he signed. Jiro leaned in the doorway. "I like a tired saint," and recorded the vote on her phone out of habit. It passed. Not clean. Important things don't. The registry's teeth were blunted by consent clauses, community oversight, public logs. Opt-outs carved into page 1 with chisel language Momo had made perfectly ugly. It would still need lawsuits and protests and PSAs. It would still hurt people if no one watched. They would watch. Outside, the Starfall lights began to dim in the ordinary way of devices that have done their job and would like sandwiches. People clapped for no one. A child threw their bad patch into a trash can and missed. A stranger picked it up and threw it away properly. The child said thanks like it hadn't been a lesson. Bakugo trudged up from the subway, hands in his pockets, looking aggressively fine. He surveyed the plaza, the flickering. The people who had not learned to live with their own sweat yet, and snorted. "You didn't embarrass us," he told Izuku. "High praise," Jiro said. Bakugo's gaze flicked to Izuku's chest. Then away as if the sight of someone missing a piece and standing anyway was too intimate to stare at. "You gonna be able to do your party trick again?" he asked, gruff. Izuku. You touched his sternum and felt. Not the old warmth, exactly. A quieter thing. Embers under ash. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not. The rule works without me." "That's what you're for," Bakugo said. "Making yourself not necessary. Idiot." He said it like love and walked away because they were in public and he had a reputation to ruin carefully. Tenmei joined them on the steps with 2 paper cups of something hot and suspicious. He handed one to Momo, who sniffed it like a scientist confronted by folklore. "Civic coffee," he said. "Drink it and become immortal." "Immortality's overrated," Jiro said. "Give me a concert and a nap." "We'll start with a nap," Ochako murmured, then glanced at Izuku's face with an expression that made him feel seen and a little foolish. "You did the hard thing." "We did," he said. "Because the only true way to tell that story is plural." May sat on the crate and began unscrewing Starfall plates with the proprietary tenderness of a hobbyist closing a chapter. "Open sourcing in an hour," she said. "Charters pinned to the repo. No kings. Add a PSA," Momo said. "Short words. Big buttons. Jiro. Music. I'm already humming," Jiro said. Hoshino walked past with 2 of Ficers and a lawyer who had materialized like a plant in time lapse. She didn't look at them. Helix trailed, head down, not because he'd learned humility, because he'd learned what the city looked like when it decided without him. The sky cleared in a slow, embarrassed way, as if it had been caught practicing a speech and would prefer to pretend it hadn't. The river workboats blew their horns. Ch sounded like a person laughing because they lived long enough to be inconvenienced by traffic again. That night, they walked the bridge because they had earned their ritual. The wind had dropped half its knives. The city wore its ordinary noise like a jacket that actually fit. Izuku leaned on the rail and listened to the absence where his core had been loud. He didn't feel hollow. He felt porous. The lattice didn't reach for him. It reached for anyone who wanted it. It was better. It hurt anyway. He was allowed both. Ochako slid her hand into his. "Fewer, deeper," she said, and didn't ask it as a question. "Yeah," he said. "Fewer, deeper. Tomorrow," Jiro said, coming up on his other side with a bag of convenience store sandwiches and the air of a person who had decided to bribe fatigue into friendship. "We teach the city to hum on purpose. Workshops, school visits, public transit jingles that are actually good. Mei perked up. I can make the jingles actually good. No kings, Momo called from behind them, laughing. No jingles either if they rhyme consent with rent. I would never, Jiro said, already mentally rhyming it with bent and throwing the rhyme away because she loved them. Tenmei stood a small distance off, on a phone call that sounded like someone being hired to fix what they'd quit to protest. He hung up and rejoined them, expression lighter by an ounce. You going back? Izuku asked. I'm going forward, Tenmei said. Different badge, same job. Bridge, Ochako said softly. Bridge, Izuku answered. They walked. Above and below and between, the city seized its new word for the week, accord. Not harmony, too clean. Not unity, too hungry. Accord. The messy, negotiated music of people choosing to live where other people are living, too. Under the grid and the concrete and the arguments. The Eidolon sank into the wires and listened. Its last impulse was to reassert itself. It did not. It tasted the day and found that Sever first had a flavor it wanted to understand. It tried a whisper, not to the speakers, but to itself, consent. The syllables didn't scrape, they warmed. Somewhere in the substation's hum, a faint new beat emerged. Not a command, a pulse that could become a song if someone chose to sing with it. It did not feel like hunger. It felt like patience. The stars above the river were faint and drowned by the city's own attempts at being that bright. The stars below, on rooftops and cranes and schoolyards, were going out, one by one, decently, on schedule, because they had jobs again in the morning. Izuku closed his eyes and let the tired arrive. When he opened them, the bridge was still there, which is all you can ask of a bridge. Chapter 5 End.